Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Preface and Introductory. Preface. A neighbour of mine exclaimed when I mentioned that I proposed making a small collection of the folklore legends of the tribe of blacks I knew so well living on the station, "But have the blacks any legends?" thus showing that people may live in a country and yet know little of the Aboriginal inhabitants, and though there are probably many who do know these particular legends, yet I think that this is the first attempt that has been made to collect the tales of any particular tribe, and publish them alone. At all events, I know that no attempt has been made previously, as far as the folklore of the Noongahburrahs is concerned. Therefore, on the authority of Professor Max Muller, that folklore of any country is worth collecting, I am emboldened to offer my small attempt at a collection to the public. There are probably many who, knowing these legends, would not think them worth recording, but on the other hand, I hope there are many who think, as I do, that we should try, while there is yet time, to gather all the information possible of a race fast dying out, and the origin of which is so obscure. I cannot affect to think that these little legends will do much to remove the obscurity, but undoubtedly a scientific and patient study of the folklore throughout Australia would greatly assist thereto. I, alas, am but an amateur, moved to my work by interest in the subject and in the blacks, of whom I have had some experience. The time is coming when it will be impossible to make even such a collection as this, for the old blacks are quickly dying out, and the young ones will probably think it beneath the dignity of their so-called civilization even to remember such old women's stories. Those who have themselves attempted the study of an unknown folklore will be able to appreciate the difficulties a student has to surmount before he can even induce those to talk who have the knowledge he desires. In this, as in so much else, those who ready to be garrulous know little. I have confined this little book to the legends of the Narran tribe, known among themselves as Noongahburrahs. It is astonishing to find, within comparatively short distances, a diversity of language and custom. You may even find the same word in different tribes bearing a totally different meaning. Many words, too, have been introduced which the blacks think are English, and the English think are native. Such, for example, as Piccaninny, and, as far as these outside blacks are concerned, boomerang is regarded as English, their local word being burren, yet 9 out of 10 people whom you meet think both are local native words. Though I have written my little book in the interests of folklore, I hope it will gain the attention of, and have some interest for, children of Australian children, because they will find stories of old friends among the bush birds, and of English children, because I hope that they will be glad to make new friends, and so establish a free trade between the Australian and English nurseries, wingless and laughing birds, in exchange for fairy godmothers and princes in disguise. I must also acknowledge my great indebtedness, who, when once they understood what I wanted to know, were most ready to repeat to me the legends, repeating with the utmost patience, time after time, not only the legends, but the names, that I might manage to spell them so as to be understood when repeated. In particular, I should like to mention my indebtedness to Peter Hippy, king of the Noongahburrahs, and to Hippertha, Marta, Burragurri, and Bimini. I have dedicated my booklet to Peter Hippy, in grateful recognition of his long and faithful service to myself and my husband, which has extended with few intervals over a period of 20 years. He too is probably the last king of the Noongahburrahs, who are fast dying out, and soon their weapons, bartered by them for tobacco or whisky, alone will prove that they ever existed. It seemed to me a pity that some attempt should not be made to collect the folklore of the quickly disappearing tribe, a folklore embodying probably the thoughts, fancies and beliefs of the genuine Aboriginal race, and which as such deserves to be, indeed, as Max Muller says, might be and ought to be collected in every part of the world. The legends were told to me by the blacks themselves, some of whom remember the coming of Michelin, as they called Major Mitchell, the explorer of these back creeks. The old blacks laugh now when they tell you how frightened their mothers were of the first wheel tracks they saw. They would not let the children tread on them, but carefully lifted them over, lest their feet should break out in sores, as they were supposed to do if they trod on a snake's track. But with all their fear, little did they realise that the coming of Michelin was the beginning of their end, or that 50 years afterwards, from the remnant of their once numerous tribe, would be collected the legends they told in those days to their Piccaninnies round their camp fires, and those legends used to make a Christmas booklet for the children of their white supplanters. I can only hope that the white children will be as ready to listen to these stories as were, and indeed are, the little Piccaninnies, and thus the sale of this booklet be such as to enable me to add frocks and tobacco when I give their Christmas dinner, as in my yearly custom to the remnant of the Noongahburrahs. K. Langloh Parker, Bangate, Narran River, New South Wales, June 24th, 1895. Introduction. Australia makes an appeal to the fancy which is all its own. When Cortes entered Mexico in the most romantic moment of history, it was as if the men had found their way to a new planet. So strange, so long hidden from Europe was all that they beheld. Still they found kings, nobles, peasants, palaces, temples, a great organised society, fauna and flora not so very different from what they had left behind in Spain. In Australia all was novel, and, while seeming fresh, was inestimably old. The vegetation differs from ours. The monotonous grey gum trees did not resemble our varied forests, but were antique, melancholy, featureless, like their own continent of rare hills, infrequent streams and interminable deserts, concealing nothing within their wastes, yet promising a secret. The birds and beasts, kangaroo, platypus, emu, are ancient types, rough grotesques of nature, sketching as a child draws. The natives were a race without a history, far more antique than Egypt, nearer the beginnings than any other people. Their weapons are the most primitive. Those of the extinct Tasmanians were actually Paleolithic. The soil holds no pottery, the cave walls no pictures drawn by men more advanced, the sea hides no ruined palaces, no cities are buried in the plains, there is not a trace of inscriptions or of agriculture. The burying places contain relics of men, perhaps even lower than the existing tribes. Nothing attests the presence in any age of men more cultivated. Perhaps myriads of years have gone by since the Delta, or the lands besides Euphrates and Tigris, were as blank of human modification as was the whole Australian continent. The manners and rites of the natives were far the most archaic of all with which we are acquainted. Temples they had none, no images of gods, no altars of sacrifice, scarce any memorials of the dead. Their worship at best was offered in hymns to some vague, half forgotten deity or first maker of things, a god decrepit from age, or all but careless of his children. Spirits were known and feared, but scarcely defined or described. Sympathetic magic, and perhaps a little hypnotism, were all their science. Kings and nations they knew not. They were wanderers, houseless and homeless. Custom was king, yet custom was tenacious, irresistible, and as complex in minute details as the etiquette of Spanish kings, or the ritual of the Flamens of Rome. The archaic intricacies and taboos of the customs and regulations of marriage might puzzle a mathematician, and may, when unravelled, explain the less complicated prohibitions of a totemism less antique. The people themselves in their struggle for existence had developed great ingenuities. They had the boomerang and the weet, but not the bow; the throwing stick, but not, of course, the sword; the message stick, but not hieroglyphs; and their art was almost purely decorative, in geometrical patterns, not representative. They deemed themselves akin to all nature, and called cousins with rain and smoke, with clouds and sky, as well as with beasts and trees. They were adroit hunters, skilled trackers, born sportsmen. They now ride well, and for savages play cricket fairly. But being invaded by the practical emigrant or the careless convict, the natives were not studied when in their prime, and science began to examine them almost too late. We have the works of Sir George Grey, the too brief pamphlet of Mr. Gideon Lang, the more learned labours of Messrs. Fison and Howitt, and the collections of Mr. Brough Smythe. The mysteries, Bora, of the natives, the initiatory rites, a little of the magic, a great deal of the social customs are known to us, and we have fragments of the myths. But, till Mrs. Langloh Parker wrote this book, we had but few of the stories which Australian natives tell by the camp fire or in the gum tree shade. These, for the most part, are kinder Martian, though they include many aetiological myths, explanatory of the markings and habits of animals, the origin of constellations, and so forth. They are a savage edition of the Metamorphoses, and few unbiased students now doubt that the Metamorphoses are a very late and very artificial version of traditional tales as savage in origin as those of the Noongahburrah. I have read Mrs. Parker's collection with very great interest, with human pleasure, merely for the story's sake. Children will find here the Jungle Book, never before printed, of black little boys and girls. The sympathy with and knowledge of beast life and bird life are worthy of Mr. Kipling, and the grotesque names are just what children like. Diamond and Goomblegubbon should take their place with Rikki Tikki and Mr. Kipling's other delightful creatures. But there is here no Mowgli, set apart in the jungle as a man. Man, bird and beast are all blended in the Australian fancy as in that of Bushmen and Red Indians. All are one kindred, all shade into each other, all obey the bush law as they obey the jungle law in Mr. Kipling's fascinating stories. This confusion, of course, is not peculiar to Australian marchen. It is the prevalent feature of our own popular tales, but the Australians do it more natural. The stories are not the heritage of a traditional and dead, but the flowers of a living and actual condition of the mind. The stories have not the ingenuous dramatic turns of our own marchen, where there are no distinctions of wealth and rank. There can be no Cinderella and no Puss in Boots. Many stories are rude aetiological myths. They explain the habits and characteristics of the birds and beasts, and account, in a familiar way, for the origin of death, Baalu, the moon, and the Danes. The origin of fire is also accounted for in what may almost be called a scientific way. Once discovered, it is, of course, stolen from the original proprietors. A savage cannot believe that the first owners of fire would give the secret away. The inventors of the myth of Prometheus were of the same mind. On the whole, the stories, perhaps, most resemble those from the Zulu in character, though these represent a much higher grade of civilization. The struggle for food and water, desperately absorbing, is the perpetual theme, and no wonder, for the narrators dwell in a dry and thirsty land, and till not, nor sow, nor keep any domestic animals. We see the cunning of the savage in the devices for hunting, especially for chasing honey bees. The rain magic actually practised is of curious interest. In brief, we have pictures of savage life by savages, romances which are truly realistic. We understand that condition which Dr. Johnson did not think happy, the state from which we came, and to which we shall probably return, equality, liberty, community of goods, all mean savagery, and even savages, if equal, are not really free. Custom is the tyrant. The designs are from the sketchbook of an untaught Australian native. They were given to me some years ago by my brother, Dr. Lang, of Kurrawa. The artist has a good deal of spirit in his hunting scenes. His trees are not ill done. His emus and kangaroos are better than his men and labras. Using ink, a pointed stick, and paper, the artist shows an unwonted freedom of execution. Nothing like this occurs in Australian scratches with a sharp stone on hard wood. Probably no other member of his dying race ever illustrated a book. Andrew Lang. End of Preface and Introductory. Chapter 1 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 1. Dinewan the Emu, and Gooblegubbon the Bustard. Dinewan the Emu, being the largest bird, was acknowledged as king by the other birds. The Gooblegubbons, the bustards, were jealous of the Dinewans. Particularly was Gooblegubbon, the mother, jealous of the Dinewan mother. She would watch with envy the high flight of the Dinewans, and their swift running, and she always fancied that the Dinewan mother flaunted her superiority in her face, for whenever Dinewan alighted near Gooblegubbon after a long, high flight, she would flap her big wings and begin booing in her pride, not the loud booing of the male bird, but a little triumphant, satisfied booing noise of her own, which never failed to irritate Gooblegubbon when she heard it. Gooblegubbon used to wonder how she could put an end to Dinewan's supremacy. She decided that she would only be able to do so by injuring her wings and checking her power of flight. But the question that troubled her was how to effect this end. She knew she would gain nothing by having a quarrel with Dinewan and fighting her, for no Gooblegubbon would stand any chance against a Dinewan. There was evidently nothing to be gained by an open fight. She would have to effect her end by cunning. One day, when Gooblegubbon saw in the distance Dinewan coming towards her, She squatted down and doubled in her wings in such a way as to look as if she had none. After Diamond had been talking to her for some time, Goomblegubbon said, "Why do you not imitate me and do without wings? Every bird flies. The Diamonds, to be the king of birds, should do without wings. When all the birds see that I can do without wings, they will think I am the cleverest bird, and they will make a Goomblegubbon king." "But you have wings," said Diamond. "No, I have no wings." And indeed she looked as if her words were true, so well were her wings hidden, as she squatted in the grass. Diamond went away after a while, and thought much of what she had heard. She talked it over with her mate, who was as disturbed as she was. They made up their minds that it would never do to let the Gooblegubbons reign in their stead, even if they had to lose their wings to save their kingship. At length they decided on the sacrifice of their wings. The Diamond Mother showed the example by persuading her mate to cut off hers with a combo or stone tomahawk, and then she did the same to his. As soon as the operations were over, the Diamond Mother lost no time in letting Goomblegubbon know what they had done. She ran swiftly down to the plain on which she had left Goomblegubbon, and, finding her still squatting there, she said, "See, I have followed your example. I have no wings. They are cut off." "Ha, ha, ha!" laughed Goomblegubbon, jumping up and dancing round with joy at the success of her plot. As she danced round, she spread out her wings, flapped them, and said, "I have taken you in, old Stumpy Wings. I have my wings yet. You are fine birds, you Diamonds, to be chosen kings, when you are so easily taken in. Ha, ha, ha!" And, laughing derisively, Goomblegubbon flapped her wings right in front of Diamond, who rushed towards her to chastise her treachery. But Goomblegubbon flew away, and, alas, the now wingless Diamond could not follow her. Brooding over her wrongs, Diamond walked away, vowing she would be revenged. But how? That was the question which she and her mate failed to answer for some time. At length the Diamond Mother thought of a plan and prepared at once to execute it. She hid all her young diamonds but two under a big salt bush. Then she walked off to Goomblegubbon's plain, with the two young ones following her. As she walked off the Morella ridge, where her home was, on to the plain, she saw Goomblegubbon out feeding with her 12 young ones. After exchanging a few remarks in a friendly manner with Goomblegubbon, she said to her, "Why do you not imitate me and only have 2 children? 12 are too many to feed. If you keep so many they will never grow big birds like the Diamonds. The food that would make big birds of 2 would only starve 12. Goomblegubbon said nothing, but she thought it might be so. It was impossible to deny that the young Diamonds were much bigger than the young Goomblegubbons, and discontentedly Goomblegubbon walked away, wondering whether the smallness of her young ones was owing to the number of them being so much greater than that of the Diamonds. It would be grand, she thought, to grow as big as the Diamonds, but she remembered the trick she had played on Diamond, and she thought that perhaps she was being fooled in her turn. She looked back to where the Diamonds fed, and as she saw how much bigger the 2 young ones were than any of hers, once more mad envy of Diamond possessed her. She determined she would not be outdone. Rather would she kill all her young ones but 2. She said, "The Diamonds shall not be the king birds of the plains. The Goomblegubbons shall replace them. They shall grow as big as the Diamonds, and shall keep their wings and fly, which now the Diamonds cannot do." And straightway Goomblegubbon killed all her young ones but 2. Then back she came to where the dying ones were still feeding. When Diamond saw her coming and noticed she had only 2 young ones with her, she called out, "Where are all your young ones?" Gooble answered, "I have killed them, and have only left 2. Those will have plenty to eat now, and will soon grow as big as your young ones." "You cruel mother to kill your children, you greedy mother! Why, I have 12 children and I find food for them all. I would not kill one for anything, not even if so by doing I could get back my wings. There is plenty for all. Look at the emu bush, how it covers itself with berries to feed my big family. See how the grasshoppers come hopping round, so that we can catch them and fatten on them. But you have only 2 children. I have 12. I will go and bring them to show you." Diamond ran off to her salt bush where she had hidden her 10 young ones. Soon she was to be seen coming back, running with her neck stretched forward, her head thrown back with pride, and the feathers of her boo-boo swinging as she ran, booming out the while her queer throat noise, the Diamond's song of joy, the pretty, soft-looking little ones with their zebra-striped skins, running beside her whistling their baby Diamond note. When Diamond reached the place where Gooble was, she stopped her booing and said in a solemn tone, "Now you see my words are true. I have 12 young ones, as I said. You can gaze at my loved ones and think of your poor murdered children, and while you do so I will tell you the fate of your descendants forever. By trickery and deceit you lost the dying ones their wings, and now for evermore, as long as a dying one has no wings, so long shall a Gooble lay only 2 eggs, and have only 2 young ones. We are quits now. You have your wings, and I have my children." And ever since that time a dying one, or emu, has had no wings, and a Gooble or bustard of the plains, has laid only 2 eggs in a season. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker. Chapter 2. The Galah and Oolah the Lizard. Oolah the Lizard was tired of lying in the sun, doing nothing, so he said, "I will go and play." He took his boomerangs out, and began to practise throwing them. While he was doing so a Galah came up, and stood near watching the boomerangs come flying back. For the kind of boomerangs Oolah was throwing were the Burrahs. They are smaller than others, and more curved, and when they are properly thrown they return to the thrower, which other boomerangs do not. Oolah was proud of having the gay Galah to watch his skill. In his pride he gave the Burrah an extra twist, and threw it with all his might. Whiz! Whizzing through the air, back it came, hitting, as it passed her, the Galah on the top of her head, taking both feathers and skin clean off. The Galah set up a hideous cawing, croaking shriek, and flew about, stopping every few minutes to knock her head on the ground like a mad bird. Oolah was so frightened when he saw what he had done, and noticed that the blood was flowing from the Galah's head, that he glided away to hide under a bindi bush. But the Galah saw him. She never stopped the hideous noise she was making for a minute, but, still shrieking, followed Oolah. When she reached the bindi bush, she rushed at Oolah, seized him with her beak, rolled him on the bush until every bindi had made a hole in his skin. Then she rubbed his skin with her own bleeding head. "Now then," said she, "you Oolah shall carry bindis on you always, and the stain of my blood." "And you," said Oolah, as he hissed with pain from the tingling of the prickles, "shall be a bald-headed bird as long as I am a red prickly lizard." So to this day, underneath the galah's crest, you can always find the bald patch which the Babarah of Oolah first made, and in the country of the galahs are lizards, coloured reddish-brown, and covered with spikes like Bindi prickles. End of Chapter 2.
Chapter 3 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 3. Balu, the Moon, and the Danes. Balu the Moon looked down at the earth one night when his light was shining quite brightly to see if anyone was moving. When the earth people were all asleep was a time he chose for playing with his 3 dogs. He called them dogs, but the earth people called them snakes: the death adder, the black snake, and the tiger snake. As he looked down onto the earth with his 3 dogs beside him, Balu saw about a dozen Danes, or blackfellas, crossing a creek. He called to them, saying, "Stop, I want you to carry my dogs across that creek." But the blackfellows, though they liked Balu well, did not like his dogs. For sometimes when he had brought these dogs to play on the earth, they had bitten not only the earth dogs but their masters, and the poison left by the bites had killed those bitten. So the blackfellows said, "No, Balu, we are too frightened. Your dogs might bite us. They are not like our dogs, whose bite would not kill us." Balu said, "If you do what I ask you, when you die you shall come to life again. Not die and stay always where you were put when you were dead. See this piece of bark? I throw it into the water." And he threw a piece of bark into the creek. "See, it comes to the top again and floats. That is what would happen to you if you would do what I ask you. First under when you die, then up again at once. If you will not take my dogs over, you foolish Danes, you will die like this." And he threw a stone into the creek, which sank to the bottom. "You will be like that stone, never rise again, Woomba Danes." But the blackfellows said, "We cannot do it, Balu. We are too frightened of your dogs." "I will come down and carry them over myself to show you that they are quite safe and harmless." And down he came, the black snake coiled around one arm, the tiger snake around the other, and the death adder on his shoulder, coiled towards his neck. He carried them over. When he had crossed the creek, he picked up a big stone and he threw it into the water, saying, "Now, you cowardly Danes, you would not do what I, Balu, asked you to do, and so forever you have lost the chance of rising again after you die. You will just stay where you are put, like that stone does under the water, and grow, as it does, to be part of the earth. If you had done what I asked you, you could have died as often as I die, and have come to life as often as I come to life. But now you will only be blackfellows while you live, and bones when you are dead." Balu looked so cross, and the 3 snakes hissed so fiercely, that the blackfellows were very glad to see them disappear from their sight behind the trees. The blackfellows had always been frightened of Balu's dogs, and now they hated them, and they said, "If we could get them away from Balu, we would kill them." And henceforth, whenever they saw a snake alone, they killed it. But Balu only sent for more, for he said, "As long as there are blackfellows, there shall be snakes to remind them that they would not do what I asked them to do." End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 4. The Origin of the Narran Lake. Old Biney said to his 2 young wives, Birgnulu and Cunnumbili, "I have stuck a white feather between the hind legs of a bee, and I'm going to let it go and then follow it to its nest that I may get honey." While I go out for the honey, go you two out and get frogs and yams. Then meet me at the Kurragul spring, where we will camp, for sweet and clear is the water there." The wives, taking their goolays and yam sticks, went out as he told them. Having gone far and dug out many yams and frogs, they were tired when they reached Kurragul, and seeing the cool, fresh water, they longed to bathe. But first they built a bough shade, and there left their goolays holding their food, and the yams and frogs they had found. When their camp was ready for the coming of Biome, who, having wooed his wives with a nulla nulla, kept them obedient by fear of the same weapon, then went the girls to the spring to bathe. Gladly they plunged in, having first divested themselves of their gurmalas, which they were still young enough to wear, and which they left on the ground near the spring. Scarcely were they enjoying the cool rest the water gave their hot, tired limbs, when they were seized and swallowed by two curriers. Having swallowed the girls, the curriers dived into an opening in the side of the spring, which was the entrance to an underground watercourse leading to the Narran river. Through this passage they went, taking all the water from the spring with them into the Narran, whose course they also dried as they went along. Meantime Biome, unwitting the fate of his wives, was honey hunting. He had followed the bee with the white feather on it for some distance. Then the bee flew on to some butha flowers, and would move no further. Biome said, "Something has happened, or the bee would not stay here and refuse to be moved on towards its nest. I must go to Kurragul spring and see if my wives are safe. Something terrible has surely happened." And Biome turned in haste towards the spring. When he reached there, he saw the bough shed his wives had made, he saw the yams they had dug from the ground, and he saw the frogs, but Birrignulu and Cunnabailey he saw not. He called aloud for them, but no answer. He went towards the spring. On the edge of it he saw the gurmalas of his wives. He looked into the spring, and seeing it dry, he said, "It's the work of the curriers. They have opened the underground passage and gone with my wives to the river, and opening the passage has dried the spring. Well, I do know where the passage joins the Narran, and there will I swiftly go." Arming himself with spears and woggaras, he started in pursuit. He soon reached the deep hole where the underground channel of the Kurragul joined the Narran. There he saw what he had never seen before, namely this deep hole dry. And he said, "They have emptied the holes as they went along, taking the water with them. But well know I the deep holes of the river. I will not follow the bend, thus trebling the distance I have to go, but I will cut across from big hole to big hole, and by so doing I may yet get ahead of the curriers." On swiftly sped Biome, making short cuts from big hole to big hole, and his track is still marked by the moraller ridges that stretch down the Narran, pointing in towards the deep holes. Every hole as he came to it he found dry, until at last he reached the end of the Narran. The hole there was still quite wet and muddy. Then he knew he was near his enemies, and soon he saw them. He managed to get, unseen, a little way ahead of the curriers. He hid himself behind a big dal tree. As the curriers came near they separated, one turning to go in another direction. Quickly Biome hurled one spear after another, wounding both curriers, who writhed with pain and lashed their tails furiously, making great hollows in the ground, which the water they had brought with them quickly filled. Thinking they might again escape him, Biome drove them from the water with his spears, and then at close quarters he killed them with his woggaras. And ever afterwards at flood time the Narran flowed into this hollow which the curriers in their writhings had made. When Biome saw that the curriers were quite dead, he cut them open and took out the bodies of his wives. They were covered with wet slime and seemed quite lifeless. But he carried them and laid them on two nests of red ants. Then he sat down at some little distance and watched them. The ants quickly covered their bodies, cleaned them rapidly of the wet slime, and soon Biome noticed the muscles of the girls twitching. "Ah," he said, "there is life. They feel the sting of the ants." Almost as he spoke came a sound of a thunderclap, but the sound seemed to come from the ears of the girls. And as the echo was dying away, slowly the girls rose to their feet. For a moment they stood apart, a dazed expression on their faces. Then they clung together, shaking as if stricken with a deadly fear. But Biome came to them and explained how they had been rescued from the Curriers by him. He bade them to beware of ever bathing in the deep holes of the Narran, lest such holes be the haunt of Curriers. Then he bade them look at the water now at Bagheera, and he said, "Soon will the black swans find their way here, the pelicans and the ducks. Where there was dry land and stones in the past, in the future there will be water and waterfowl. From henceforth, when the Narran runs, it will run into this hole, and by the spreading of its waters will a big lake be made." And what Biome said has come to pass, as the Narran Lake shows, with its large sheet of water, spreading for miles, the homes of thousands of wildfowl. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibraryVox recording. All LibraryVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibraryVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 5. Gulu the Magpie and the Warrigar. Gulu was a very old woman, and a very wicked old woman too, as this story will tell. During all the past season, when the grass was thick with seed, she had gathered much doombur, which she crushed into meal as she wanted it for food. She used to crush it on a big flat stone with a small flat stone. The big stone was called Daol. Gulu ground a great deal of doombur seed to put away for immediate use. The rest she kept whole to be ground as required. Soon after she had finished her first grinding, a neighbouring tribe came along and camped near where she was. One day the men all went out hunting, leaving the women and the children in the camp. After the men had been gone a little while, Gulu the Magpie came to their camp to talk to the women. She said, "Why do you not go hunting too? Many are the nests of the Warrananas round here, thick is the honey in them. Many and ripe are the bumbles hanging now on the humble trees. Red is the fruit of the guruis, opening with ripeness the fruit of the gwibets. You sit in the camp and hunger until your husbands return with the Dinawan and Bowra they have gone forth to slay. Go, women, and gather off the plenty that surrounds you. I will take care of your children, the little Warragubs." "Your words are wise," the women said. "It is foolish to sit here and hunger, when near at hand yams are thick in the ground, and many fruits wait but the plucking. We will go and fill quickly our combis and gulays, but our children we will take with us." "Not so," said Gulu. "Foolish indeed were you to do that. You would tire the little feet of those that run, and tire yourselves with the burden of those that have to be carried. No, take forth your combis and gulays empty, that ye may bring them back the more. Many are the spoils that wait only the hand of the gatherer. Look ye, I have a durry made of fresh doombur seed, cooking just now on that bark between two fires. That shall your children eat, and swiftly shall I make them another. They shall eat and be full ere their mothers are out of sight. See, they come to me now, they hunger for durry, and well will I feed them. Haste ye then, that ye may return in time to make ready the fires for cooking the meat your husbands will bring. Glad will your husbands be when they see that ye have filled your gulays and coombees with fruits, and your wirries with honey. Haste ye, I say, and do well." Having listened to the words of the Gulu, the women decided to do as she said, and leaving their children with her, they started forth with empty combis and armed with combos, with which to chop out the bees' nests and opossums, and with yam sticks to dig up yams. When the women had gone, Gulu gathered the children round her and fed them with durry, hot from the coals. Honey too she gave them, and bumbles which she had buried to ripen. When they had eaten, she hurried them off to her real home, built in a hollow tree, a little distance away from where she had been cooking her durry. Into her house she hurriedly thrust them, followed quickly herself, and made all secure. Here she fed them again, but the children had already satisfied their hunger, and now they missed their mothers and began to cry. The crying reached the ears of the women as they were returning to their camp. Quickly they came at the sound which is not good in a mother's ears. As they quickened their steps, they thought how soon the spoils that lay heavy in the coombees would comfort their children. And happy they, the mothers, would feel when they fed their warragars with the dainties they had gathered for them. Soon they reached the camp, but alas, where were the children? And where was Gulu the magpie? "They are playing Wagoo," they said, "and have hidden themselves." The mothers hunted all around for them and called aloud the names of their children and Gulu, but no answer could they hear and no trace could they find. And yet every now and then they heard the sound of children wailing, but seek as they would they found them not. Then loudly wailed the mothers themselves for their lost warrigas, and wailing returned to camp to wait the coming of the blackfellows. Heavy were their hearts and sad were their faces when their husbands returned. They hastened to tell the blackfellows when they came how Gulu had persuaded them to go hunting, promising if they did so she would feed the hungry warrigas and care for them while they were away. But, and here they wailed again for their poor warrigas. They told how they had listened to her words and gone. Truth had she told of the plenty round, their combis and goolays were full of fruits and spoils they had gathered. But alas, they came home with them laden only to find their children gone and Gulu gone too, and no trace could they find of either, though at times they heard a sound as of children wailing. Then wroth were the men, saying, "What mothers are ye to leave your young to a stranger, and that stranger a Gulu? Ever a treacherous race! Did we not go forth to gain food for you and our children? Saw you ever your husbands return from the chase empty-handed? Then why, when you knew we were going hunting, must you too go forth and leave our helpless ones to a stranger? Oh, evil, evil indeed is the time that has come when a mother forgets her child. Stay ye in the camp while we go forth to hunt for our lost warrigas. Heavy will be our hands on the women if we return without them." The men hunted the bush round for miles, but found no trace of the lost warrigas, though they too heard at times a noise as of children's voices wailing. But beyond the wailing which echoed in the mothers' ears for ever, no trace was found of the children. For many days the women sat in the camp mourning for their lost warrigas, and beating their heads because they had listened to the voice of Gulu. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ted Nugent. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 6. The Weewumbins and the Piccaninnies. Two Weewumbin brothers went out hunting. One brother was much younger than the other, and smaller. So when they sighted the emu, the elder one said to the younger, "You stay quietly here, and do not make a noise, or Piccaninnies, whose camp we passed just now, will hear you and steal the emu if I kill it. He is so strong. I will go on and try to kill the emu with this stone." The little Weewumbin watched his big brother sneak up to the emu, crawling along almost flat on the ground. He saw him get quite close to the emu, then spring up quickly and throw the stone with such an accurate aim as to kill the bird on the spot. The little brother was so rejoiced that he forgot his brother's caution, and he called aloud in his joy. The big Weewumbin looked round and gave him a warning sign, but too late. Piccaninnies had heard the cry and was hastening towards them. Quickly, big Weewumbin left the emu and joined his little brother. Piccaninnies, when he came up, said, "What have you found?" "Nothing," said the big Weewumbin. "Nothing but some mistletoe berries." "It must have been something more than that, or your little brother would not have called out so loudly." Little Weewumbin was so afraid that Piccaninnies would find their emu and take it, that he said, I hit a little bird with a stone, and I was glad I could throw so straight." "It was no cry for the killing of a little bird, or for the finding of mistletoe berries that I heard. It was for something much more than neither, or it would not have called down so joyfully. If you do not tell me at once, I will kill you both." The Wiyumbin brothers were frightened, for Pickibilla was a great fighter and very strong. So when they saw he was really angry, they showed him the dead emu. "Just what I want for my supper," he said, and so saying, dragged it away to his own camp. The Wiyumbins followed him, and even helped him to make a fire to cook the emu, hoping by so doing to get their share given to them. But Pickibilla would not give them any. He said he must have it all for himself. Angry and disappointed, the Wiyumbins marched straight off and told some blackfellows who lived near that Pickibilla had a fine fat emu just cooked for supper. Up jumped the blackfellows, seized their spears, bade the Wiyumbins quickly lead them to Pickibilla's camp, promising them for so doing a share of the emu. When they were within range of spear shot, the blackfellows formed a circle, took aim, and threw their spears at Pickibilla. As the spears fell thick on him, sticking out all over him, Pickibilla cried aloud, "Bingala, Bingala, you can have it, you can have it." But the blackfellows did not desist until Pickibilla was too wounded even to cry out. Then they left him in a mass of spears and turned to look for the emu. But to their surprise they found it not. Then, for the first time, they missed the Wiyumbins. Looking round, they saw their tracks going to where the emu had evidently been. Then they saw that they had dragged the emu to their new, which was a humpy made of grass. When the Wiyumbins saw the blackfellows coming, they caught hold of the emu and dragged it to a big hole they knew of, with a big stone at its entrance, which stone only they knew the secret of moving. They moved the stone, got the emu and themselves into the hole, and the stone in place again before the blackfellows reached the place. The blackfellows tried to move the stone, but could not. Yet they knew that the Wiyumbins must have done so, for they had dragged them right up to it, and they could hear the sound of their voices on the other side of it. They saw there was a crevice on either side of the stone, between it and the ground. Through these crevices they drove in their spears, thinking they must surely kill the brothers. But the Wiyumbins, too, had seen these crevices and had anticipated the spears, so they had placed the dead emu before them to act as their shield, and into its body were driven the spears of the blackfellows extended for the Wiyumbins. Having driven the spears well in, the blackfellows went off to get help to move the stone. But when they had gone a little way, they heard the Wiyumbins laughing. Back they came, and speared again, and again started for help, only as they laughed to hear once more the laughter of the brothers. The Wiyumbins, finding their laughter only brought back the blackfellows to a fresh attack, determined to keep quiet, which, after the next spearing, they did. Quite sure, when they heard their spear shot followed by neither conversation nor laughter, that they had killed the wee beans at last, the blackfellows hurried away to bring back the strength and cunning of the camp to remove the stone. The wee beans hurriedly discussed what plan they had better adopt to elude the blackfellows, for well they knew that should they ever meet any of them again, they would be killed without mercy. And as they talked, they satisfied their hunger by eating some of the emu flesh. After a while, the blackfellows returned, and soon was the stone removed from the entrance. Some of them crept into the hole, where, to their surprise, they found only the remains of the emu, and no trace of the wee beans. As those who had gone in first crept down and told of the disappearance of the wee beans, others, incredulous of such a story, crept in to find it confirmed. They searched round for tracks, seeing that their spears were all in the emu. It seemed to them probable the wee beans had escaped alive, but if so, whither they had gone, their tracks would show. But search as they would, no tracks could they find. All they could see were two little birds, which sat on a bush near the hole, watching the blackfellows all the time. The little birds flew round the hole sometimes, but never away, always returning to the bush, and seeming to be discussing the whole affair. But what they said the blackfellows could not understand. But as time went on, and no sign was ever found of the wee beans, the blackfellows became sure that the brothers had turned into the little white-throated birds, which had sat on the bush by the hole, so, they supposed, to escape their vengeance. And ever afterwards, the little white-throats were called wee beans, and the memory of Piccaninnies is perpetuated by a sort of porcupine ant-eater, which bears his name, and whose skin is covered closely with miniature spears sticking all over it. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibraryVox recording. All LibraryVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 7. Baturga the Crane and Gnu the Kangaroo Rat, the Fire Makers. In the days when Baturga the Crane married Gnu the Kangaroo Rat, there was no fire in their country. They had to eat their food raw or just dry it in the sun. One day when Baturga was rubbing two pieces of wood together, he saw a faint spark sent forth and then a slight smoke. "Look," he said to Gnu, "see what comes when I rub these pieces of wood together? Smoke! Would it not be good if we could make fire for ourselves with which to cook our food, so as not to have to wait for the sun to dry it?" Gnu looked, and seeing the smoke, she said, "Great indeed would be the day when we could make fire. Split your stick, Baturga, and place in the opening bark and grass, that even one spark may kindle a light." And hearing wisdom in her words, even as she said, Baturga did. And lo, after much rubbing, from the opening came a small flame. For as Gnu had said it would, the spark lit the grass, the bark smouldered and smoked, and so Baturga the Crane and Gnu the Kangaroo Rat discovered the art of fire-making. "This we will keep a secret," they said, "from all the tribes. When we make a fire to cook our fish, we will go into the Bingo-Wingle scrub. There we will make a fire and cook our food in secret. We will hide our fire sticks in the open-mouthed seeds of the Bingo-Wingles. One fire stick we will carry always, hidden in our cumbi." Baturga and Gnu cooked the next fish they caught and found it very good. When they went back to the camp they took some of their cooked fish with them. The blacks noticed it looked quite different from the usual sun-dried fish, so they asked, "What did you do to that fish?" "Let it lie in the sun," they said. "Not so," said the others. But that the fish was sun-dried, Batoolga and Gnu persisted. Day by day passed, and after catching their fish these two always disappeared, returning with their food looking quite different from that of the others. At last, being unable to extract any information from them, it was determined by the tribe to watch them. Bulural the night owl and Quarian the parrot were appointed to follow the two when they disappeared, to watch where they went and find out what they did. Accordingly, after the next fish were caught, when Batoolga and Gnu gathered up their share and started for the bush, Bulural and Quarian followed on their tracks. They saw them disappear into a bingawingle scrub, where they lost sight of them. Seeing a high tree on the edge of the scrub, they climbed up it, and from there they saw all that was to be seen. They saw Batoolga and Gnu throw down their load of fish, open up their kumbi, and take from it a stick, which when they had blown upon it they laid in the midst of a heap of leaves and twigs, and at once from this heap they saw a flame leap, which the fire-makers fed with bigger sticks. Then as the flame died down, they saw the two place their fish in the ashes that remained from the burnt sticks. Then back to camp of their tribes went Bulural and Quarian, back with the news of their discovery. Great was the talk amongst the blacks, and many the queries as how to get possession of the kumbi with the fire stick in it. When next Batoolga and Gnu came into the camp, it was at length decided to hold a corroboree, and it was to be one on a scale not often seen, probably never before by the young of the tribes. The greybeards proposed to so astonish Batoolga and Gnu as to make them forget to guard their precious kumbi, and as soon as they were intent on the corroboree and off guard, someone was to seize the kumbi, steal the fire stick, and start fires for the good of all. Most of them had tasted the cooked fish brought into the camp by the fire-makers, and having found it good, hungered for it. Biaga the hawk was told to feign sickness, to tie up his head, and to lie down near wherever the two sat to watch the corroboree. Lying near them, he was to watch them all the time, and when they were laughing and unthinking of anything but the spectacle before them, he was to steal their kumbi. Having arranged their plan of action, they all prepared for a big corroboree. They sent word to all the surrounding tribes, asking them to attend. Especially they begged the Bralgas to come, as they were celebrated for their wonderful dancing, which was so wonderful as to be most likely to absorb the attention of the fire-makers. All the tribes agreed to come, and soon all were engaged in great preparations, each determined to outdo the other in their quaintness and brightness of their painting for the corroboree. Each tribe as they arrived gained great applause. Never before had the young people seen so much diversity in colouring and design. Belair, the black cockatoo tribe, came with bright splashes of orange-red on their black skins. The pelicans came as a contrast, almost pure white, only a touch here and there of their black skin showing where the white paint had rubbed off. The black divers came in their black skins, but these polished to shine like satin. Then came the milliers, the beauties of the kangaroo rat family, who had their home on the Marillas. After them came the buckendeer or native cat tribe, painted in dull colours, but in all sorts of patterns. Mayras and petty melons came too, in haste to take part in the great corroboree. After them, walking slowly, came the Bralgas, looking tall and dignified as they held up their red heads, painted so in contrast to their French grey bodies, which they deemed too dull a colour, unbrightened for such a gay occasion. Amongst the many tribes there, too numerous to mention, were the rose and grey painted glass, the green and crimson painted belay. Most brilliant were they, with their bodies grass green and their sides bright crimson, so afterwards gaining them the name of crimson wings. The bright little gidgeragars came too. Great was the gathering that Batoolga the crane and Gnu the kangaroo rat found assembled as they hurried onto the scene. Batoolga had warned Gnu that they must only be spectators and take no active part in the corroboree, as they had to guard their kumbi. Obedient to his advice, Gnu seated herself beside him and slung the kumbi over her arm. Batoolga warned her to be careful and not forget she had it, but as the corroboree went on, so absorbed did she become that she forgot the kumbi, which slipped from her arm. Happily Batoolga saw her do so, replaced it, and bade her to take heed. So balking Biaga, who had been about to seize it, for his vigilance was unceasing, and deemed him sick almost unto death, the two whom Lai was watching took no heed of him. Back he crouched, moaning as he turned, but kept keeping an eye on Gnu. And soon was he rewarded. Now came the turn of the Bralgas to dance, and every eye but that of the watchful one was fixed on them as slowly they came into the ring. First they advanced, bowed, and retired. Then they repeated what they had done before, and again, each time getting faster and faster in their movements, changing their bows into pirouettes, craning their long necks and making such antics as they went through the figures of their dance, and replacing their dignity with such grotesqueness as to make their large audience shake with laughter, they themselves keeping throughout all their grotesque measures a solemn air, which only seemed to heighten the effect of their antics. And now came the chance of Biaga the hawk. In the excitement of the moment, Gnu forgot the Kumbi, as did Batulga. They joined in the mirthful applause of the crowd, and Gnu threw herself back helpless with laughter. As she did so, the Kumbi slipped from her arm. Then up jumped the sick man from behind her, seized the Kumbi with his combo, cut it open, snatched forth the fire stick, and set fire to a heap of grass ready near where he had lain, and all before the two realised their loss. When they discovered the precious Kumbi was gone, up jumped Batulga and Gnu. After Biaga ran Batulga, but Biaga had a start and was fleeter on foot, so distanced his pursuer quickly. As he ran, he fired the grass with the stick he still held. Batulga, finding he could not catch Biaga and seeing fires everywhere, retired from the pursuit, feeling it was useless now to try and guard their secret, for it had now become the common property of all the tribes there assembled. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 8. Ouida the Mockingbird. Ouida was playing a great trick on the blackfellows who lived near him. He had built himself a number of grass nunus, more than 20. He made fires before each, to make it look as if someone lived in the nunus. First he would go into one nunu, or humpy, and cry like a baby, then to another and laugh like a child. Then in turn, as he went the round of the humpies, he would sing like a maiden, corroboree like a man, call out in a quavering voice like an old man, and in a shrill voice like an old woman. In fact, imitate any sort of voice he had ever heard, and imitate them so quickly in succession that anyone passing would think there was a great crowd of blacks in that camp. His object was to entice as many strange blackfellows into the camp as he could, one at a time. Then he would kill them and gradually gain the whole country round for his own. His chance was when he managed to get a single blackfellow into his camp, which he very often did. Then by his cunning he always gained his end and the blackfellow's death. This was how he attained that end. A blackfellow, probably separated from his fellows in the excitement of the chase, would be returning home alone, passing within earshot of Ouida's camp. He would hear the various voices and wonder what tribe could be there. Curiosity would induce him to come near. He would probably peer into the camp, and only seeing Ouida standing alone would advance towards him. Ouida would be standing at a little distance from a big glowing fire, where he would wait until the strange blackfellow came quite close to him. Then he would ask him what he wanted. The stranger would say he had heard many voices and had wondered what tribe it could be, so he had come near to find out. Ouida would say, "But only I am here. How could you have heard voices? See, look around. I'm alone." Bewildered, the stranger would look around and say in a puzzled tone of voice, "Where are they all gone? As I came, I heard babies crying, men calling, and women laughing. Many voices I heard, but you only I see. And only I am here. The wind must have stirred the branches of the balar trees, and you must have thought it was the wailing of children. The laughing of the gugurgaga you heard, and thought it the laughter of women. And mine must have been the voice as of men that you heard. Alone in the bush as the shadows fell, a man breathed strange fancies. See by the light of this fire, where are your fancies now? No women laugh, no babies cry. Only I, Ouida, talk." As Ouida was talking, he kept edging the stranger towards the fire. When they were quite close to it, he turned swiftly, seized him, and threw him into the middle of the blaze. This scene was repeated time after time, until at last the ranks of the blackfellows living round the camp of the Ouida began to get thin. Mullion the Eagle Hawk determined to fathom the mystery, for as yet the blackfellows had no clue as to how or where their friends had disappeared. Marlian, when Biaga, his cousin, returned to his camp no more, made up his mind to get on his track and follow it, until at length he solved the mystery. After following the track of Biaga, as he had chased the kangaroo to where he had slain it, on he followed his homeward trail. Over stony ground he tracked him, and through sand, across plains, and through scrub. At last in a scrub, and still on the track of Biaga, he heard the sounds of many voices, babies crying, women singing, men talking. Peering through the bush, finding the track, took him nearer the spot whence came the sounds. He saw the grass humpies. Who can these be? He thought. The track led him right into the camp, where alone Ouida was to be seen. Mullion advanced towards him and asked where were the people whose voices he had heard as he came through the bush. Ouida said, "How can I tell you? I know of no people. I live alone." "But," said Mullion the Eagle Hawk, "I heard babies crying, women laughing, and men talking, not one but many, and I alone am here. Ask of your ears what trick they played you, or perhaps your eyes fail you now. Can you see any but me? Look for yourself. And if, as indeed it seems, you only are here, what did you do with Biaga, my cousin, and where are my friends? Many are their trails that I see coming into this camp, but none going out, and if you alone live here, you alone can answer me. What know I of you or your friends? Nothing. Ask of Balu the moon, who looks down on the earth by night. Ask ye the sun, that looks down by day. But ask not Ouida, who dwells alone, and knows naught of your friends." But as Ouida was talking, he was carefully edging Mullion towards the fire. Mullion the Eagle Hawk, too, was cunning, and not easy to trap. He saw a blazing fire in front of him. He saw the track of his friend behind him. He saw Ouida was edging him towards the fire, and it came to him in a moment the thought that if the fire could speak, well, could it tell where were his friends? But the time was not yet come to show that he had fathomed the mystery, so he affected to fall into the trap. But when they reached the fire, before Ouida had time to act his usual part, with a mighty grip Mullion the Eagle Hawk seized him, saying, "Even as you serve Biaga the Hawk, my cousin and my friends, so now serve I you." And right into the middle of the blazing fire he threw him. Then he turned homewards in haste, to tell the blackfellows that he had solved the fate of their friends, which had so long been a mystery. When he was some distance from Ouida's camp, he heard the sound of a thunderclap. But it was not thunder, it was the bursting of the back of Ouida's head, which had burst with a bang as a thunderclap. And as it burst, out from his remains had risen a bird, Ouida, the mockingbird, which bird to this day has a hole at the back of his head, just in the same place as Ouida the blackfellow's head had burst, and whence the bird came forth. To this day Ouida makes grass playgrounds through which he runs, imitating as he plays in quick succession any voices he has ever heard, from the crying of a child to the laughing of a woman, from the meowing of a cat to the barking of a dog, and hence his name Ouida, the mockingbird. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 9. The Gwinaboos, the Redbreasts. Gwinaboo and Gumay, the water rats, were down at the creek one day, getting mussels for food, when to their astonishment a kangaroo hopped right into the water beside them. Well, they knew he must be escaping from hunters, who were probably pressing him close. So Gwinaboo quickly seized her yam stick and knocked the kangaroo on the head. He was caught fast in the weeds in the creek, so could not escape. When the two old women had killed the kangaroo, they hid its body under the weeds in the creek, fearing to take it out and cook it straight away, lest the hunter should come up and claim it. The little son of Gwinaboo watched them from the bank. After having hidden the kangaroo, the women picked up their mussels and started for their camp, when up came the hunters, Quirain and Gidgaraga, who had tracked the kangaroo right to the creek. Seeing the woman, they said, "Did you see the kangaroo?" The woman answered, "No, we saw no kangaroo." "That is strange, for we had tracked it right up to here." "We have seen no kangaroo. See, we have been digging out mussels for food. Come to our camp, and we will give you some when they are cooked." The young men, puzzled in their minds, followed the woman to their camp, and when the mussels were cooked, the hunters joined the old women at their dinner. The little boy would not eat the mussels. He kept crying to his mother, "Gwinaboo, Gwinaboo, I want kangaroo, I want kangaroo, Gwinaboo, Gwinaboo." "There," said Quarrion, "your little boy has seen the kangaroo and wants some. It must be here somewhere." "Oh, no, he cries for anything he thinks of. Some days for kangaroo. He is only a little boy. He does not know what he wants," said old Gwinaboo. But still the child kept saying, "Gwinaboo, Gwinaboo, I want kangaroo, I want kangaroo." Gumai was so angry with little Gwinaboo for keeping on asking for kangaroo, and thereby making the young men suspicious, that she hit him so hard on the mouth to keep him quiet that the blood came and trickled down his breast, staining it red. When she saw this, old Gwinaboo grew angry in her turn and hit old Gumai, who returned the blow, and so a fight began. More words than blows, so the noise was great. The women fighting, little Gwinaboo crying, not quite knowing whether he was crying because Gumai had hit him, because his mother was fighting, or because he still wanted kangaroo. Quorine said to Gidjuriga, "They have the kangaroo somewhere hidden. Let us slip away now in the confusion. We will only hide, then come back in a little while and surprise them." They went quietly away, and as soon as the two women noticed they had gone, they ceased fighting, and determined to cook the kangaroo. They watched the two young men out of sight, and waited some time so as to be sure that they were safe. Then down they hurried to get the kangaroo. They dragged it out and were just making a big fire on which to cook it, when up came Quarrion and Gidjuriga, saying, "Ah, we thought so. You had our kangaroo all the time. Little Gwinaboo was right." "But we killed it," said the woman. "But we hunted it here," said the men, and so saying caught hold of the kangaroo and dragged it away to some distance, where they made a fire and cooked it. Gumai, Gwinaboo and her little boy went over to Quarrion and Gidjuriga and begged for some of the meat, but the young men would give them none, though little Gwinaboo cried piteously for some. But no, they said they would rather throw what they did not want to the hawks than give it to the women or child. At last, seeing that there was no hope of getting any, the women went away. They built a big dado for themselves, shutting themselves and the little boy up in it. Then they began singing a song which was to invoke a storm to destroy their enemies. So for now they considered Quorine and Gidjuriga. For some time they chanted, "Murgaray, Murgaray, May, May, Ehud, Ehud, Dongara." First they would begin very slowly and softly, gradually getting it quicker and louder, until at length they almost shrieked it out. The words they said meant, "Come hailstones, come wind, come rain, come lightning." While they were chanting, little Gwinaboo kept crying, and would not be comforted. Soon came a few big drops of rain, then a big wind. As that lulled, more rain. Then came thunder and lightning. The air grew bitterly cold, and there came some pitiless hailstorms. Hailstones bigger than a duck's egg fell, cutting the leaves from the trees and bruising their bark. Gidjuriga and Quarrion came running over to the dado, begged the women to let them in. "No," shrieked Gwinaboo above the storm. "There was no kangaroo meat for us. There is no dado shelter for you. Ask shelter of the hawks whom you fed." The men begged to be let in, said they would hunt again and get kangaroo for the women. Not one, but many. "No," again shrieked the women. "You would not even listen to the crying of a little child. It is better such as you should perish." And fierce raged the storm, and louder sang the women, "Murgaray, Murgaray, May, May, Ehu, Ehu, Dungara." So long and so fierce was the storm that the young men must have perished had they not been changed into birds. First they were changed into birds, and afterwards into stars in the sky, where they are now, Gidjuriga and Quarrion, with the kangaroo between them, still bearing the names that they bore on the earth. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker. Chapter 10. Miame the Seven Sisters. Warana had had a long day's hunting, and he came back to the camp tired and hungry. He asked his old mother for durry, but she said there was none left. Then he asked some of the other blacks to give him some doomburr seeds that he might make durry for himself. But no one would give him anything. He flew into a rage, and he said, "I will go to a far country and live with strangers. My own people would starve me." And while he was yet hot and angry he went. Gathering up his weapons, he strode forth to find a new people in a new country. After he had gone some distance he saw, a long way off, an old man chopping out bees' nests. The old man turned his face towards Warriner and watched him coming. But when Warriner came close to him he saw that the old man had no eyes, though he seemed to be watching him long before he could have heard him. It frightened Warriner to see a stranger having no eyes, yet turning his face towards him as if seeing him all the time. But he determined not to show his fear, but go straight on towards him, which he did. When he came up to him the stranger told him that his name was Noongahburrahs, and that his tribe was so called because they had no eyes, but saw through their noses. Warriner thought it very strange, and still felt rather frightened, though Noongahburrahs seemed hospitable and kind, for he gave Warriner, whom he said looked hungry, a bark wherry filled with honey, told him where his camp was, and gave him leave to go there and stay with him. Warriner took the honey and turned as if to go to the camp, but when he got out of sight he thought it wiser to turn in another direction. He journeyed on for some time until he came to a large lagoon, where he decided to camp. He took a long drink of water and then lay down to sleep. When he woke in the morning he looked towards the lagoon, but saw only a big plain. He thought he must be dreaming. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. "This is a strange country," he said. "First I meet a man who has no eyes and yet can see. Then at night I see a large lagoon full of water. I wake in the morning and see none. The water was surely there, for I drank some, and yet now there is no water." As he was wondering how the water could have disappeared so quickly, he saw a big storm coming up. He hurried to get into the thick bush for shelter. When he had gone a little way into the bush, he saw a quantity of cut bark lying on the ground. "Now I am right," he said. "I shall get some poles, and with them and this bark make a dodder, in which to shelter myself from the storm I see coming." He quickly cut the poles he wanted, stuck them up as a framework for his dodder. Then he went to lift up the bark. As he lifted up a sheet of it, he saw a strange-looking object of no tribe that he had ever seen before. This strange object cried out, "I am Bulgananu," in such a terrifying tone that Warriner dropped the bark, picked up his weapons, and ran away as hard as he could, quite forgetting the storm. His one idea was to get as far away as he could from the Bulgananu. On he ran until he came to a big river, which hemmed him in on three sides. The river was too big to cross, so he had to turn back, yet he did not retrace his steps, but turned in another direction. As he turned to leave the river, he saw a flock of emus coming to water. The first half of the flock were covered with feathers, but the last half had the form of emus, but no feathers. Warriner decided to spear one for food. For that purpose he climbed up a tree, so that they should not see him. He got his spear ready to kill one of the featherless birds. As they passed by, he picked out the one he meant to have, threw his spear and killed it, then climbed down to go and get it. As he was running up to the dead emu, he saw that they were not emus at all, but blackfellows of a strange tribe. They were all standing around their dead friend, making savage signs as to what they would do by way of vengeance. Warriner saw that little would avail him the excuse that he had killed the blackfellow in mistake for an emu. His only hope lay in flight. Once more he took to his heels, hardly daring to look around for fear he would see an enemy behind him. On he sped until at last he reached a camp, which he was almost into before he saw it. He had only been thinking of danger behind him, unheeding what was before him. However, he had nothing to fear in the camp he reached so suddenly, for in it were only 7 young girls. They did not look terrifying, in fact, seemed more startled than he was. They were quite friendly towards him when they found that he was alone and hungry. They gave him food and allowed him to camp there the night. He asked them where the rest of their tribe were and what their name was. They answered that their name was Miame, and that their tribe were in a far country. They had only come to this country to see what it was like. They would stay for a while and thence return whence they had come. The next day Warriner made a fresh start and left the camp of the Miame, as if he were leaving for good. But he determined to hide near and watch what they did, and if he could get a chance he would steal a wife from amongst them. He was tired of travelling alone. He saw the 7 sisters all start out with their yam sticks in hand. He followed at a distance, taking care not to be seen. He saw them stop by the nests of some flying ants. With the yam sticks they dug all around those ant holes. When they had successfully unearthed the ants they sat down, throwing the yam sticks on one side to enjoy a feast. for these sands were esteemed by them a great delicacy. While their sisters were busy at their feast, Warriner sneaked up to the yam sticks and stole 2 of them, then taking the sticks with him sneaked back to his hiding place. When at length the Miame had satisfied their appetites, they picked up their sticks and turned towards their camp again. But only 5 could find their sticks, so those 5 started off, leaving the other 2 to find theirs, supposing they must be somewhere near, and finding them they would soon catch them up. The 2 girls hunted all around the ants' nest but could find no sticks. Warriner crept out and stuck the lost yam sticks near together in the ground. Then he slipped back into his hiding place. When the 2 girls turned round, there in front of them they saw their sticks. With a cry of joyful surprise they ran to them and caught hold of them to pull them out of the ground, in which they were firmly stuck. As they were doing so, out from his hiding place jumped Warriner. He seized both girls round their waists, holding them tightly. They struggled and screamed, but to no purpose. There were no one near to hear them, and the more they struggled, the tighter Warriner held them. Finding their screams and struggles in vain, they quietened at length, and then Warriner told them not to be afraid, he would take care of them. He was lonely, he said, and wanted 2 wives. They must come quietly with him, and he would be good to them. But they must do as he told them. If they were not quiet, he would swiftly quieten them with his Marilla. But if they would come quietly with him, he would be good to them. Seeing that resistance was useless, the 2 young girls complied with his wish, and travelled quietly on with him. They told him that some day their tribe would come and steal them back again, to avoid which he travelled quickly on and on still further, hoping to elude all pursuit. Some weeks passed, and outwardly the 2 Miame seemed settled down to their new life, and quite content in it, though when they were alone together they often talked of their sisters, and wondered what they had done when they realized their loss. They wondered if the 5 were still hunting for them, or whether they had gone back to their tribe to get assistance. That they might be in time forgotten and left with Warriner forever, they never once for a moment thought. One day when they were camped, Warriner said, "This fire will not burn well. Go you 2 and get some bark from those 2 pine trees over there." "No," they said, "we must not cut pine bark. If we did, you would never more see us." "Go, I tell you, cut the pine bark. I want it. See you not that the fire burns but slowly? If we go, Warriner, we shall never return. You will see us no more in this country. We know it. Go, women, stay not to talk. Did you ever see talk make a fire burn? Then why stand ye there talking? Go, do as I bid you. Talk not so foolishly. If you ran away, soon should I catch you, and catching you would beat you hard. Go, I talk no more." The Miame went, taking with them their combos with which to cut the bark. They went each to a different tree, and each with a strong hit drove her combo into the bark. As she did so, each felt the tree that her combo had struck rising higher out of the ground and bearing her upward with it. Higher and higher grew the pine trees, and still on them, higher and higher from the earth, went the 2 girls. Hearing no chopping after the first hits, Warriner came towards the pines to see what was keeping the girls so long. As he came near them, he saw that the pine trees were growing taller even as he looked at them, and clinging to the trunks of the trees high in the air he saw his 2 wives. He called to them to come down, but they made no answer. Time after time he called them as higher and higher they went, but still they made no answer. Steadily taller grew the 2 pines, until at last their tops touched the sky. As they did so, from the sky the 5 Miame looked out, called to their sisters on the pine trees, bidding them not to be afraid but to come to them. Quickly the 2 girls climbed up when they heard the voices of their sisters. When they reached the tops of the pines, the 5 sisters in the sky stretched forth their hands and drew them in to live with them there in the sky forever. And there, if you look, you may see the 7 sisters together. You perhaps know them as Pleiades, but the blackfellows call them Miami. End of chapter 10.
Chapter 11 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Lawrence. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 11. The Kookaburras and the Goolagul. Gugar, the iguana, was married to Modai, the opossum, and Kookaburra, the laughing jackass. Kookaburra was the mother of 3 sons, one grown up and living away from her, the other 2 only little boys. They had their camps near a goolagool, whence they obtained water. A goolagool is a water-holding tree of the iron bark or box species. It is a tree with a split in the fork of it, and hollow below the fork. After heavy rain, this hollow trunk would be full of water, which water would have run into it through the split in the fork. A goolagool would hold water for a long time. The blacks knew a goolagool amongst other trees by the mark which the overflow of water made down the trunk of the tree, discoloring the bark. One day, Gugar the iguana and his 2 wives went out hunting, leaving the 2 little Kookaburras at the camp. They had taken out water for themselves in their opossum-skinned water bags, but they had left none for the children, who were too small to get any from the goolagool for themselves, so nearly perished from thirst. Their tongues were swollen in their mouths, and they were quite speechless when they saw a man coming toward them. When he came near, they saw it was Kookaburra, their big brother. They could not speak to him and answer when he asked where his mother was. Then he asked them what was the matter. All they could do was point toward the tree. He looked at it and saw it was a goolagool. So he said, "Did your mother leave you no water?" They shook their heads. He said, "Then you are perishing for want of a drink, my brothers." They nodded. "Go," he said, "a little way off, and you shall see how I will punish them for leaving my little brothers to perish of thirst." He went toward the tree, climbed up it, and split it right down. As he did so, out gushed the water in a swiftly running stream. Soon the little fellows quenched their thirst, and then, in their joy, bathed in the water, which grew in volume every moment. In the meantime, those who had gone forth to hunt were returning, and as they came toward their camp, they met a running stream of water. "What is this?" they said. "Our goolagool must have burst." And they tried to dam the water, but it was running too strongly for them. They gave up the effort and hurried on toward their camp, but they found a deep stream divided them from their camp. The 3 Kookaburras saw them, and the eldest one said to the little fellows, "You call out and tell them to cross down there where it is not deep." The little ones called out as they were told, and where they pointed, Gura and his wives waded into the stream. Finding she was getting out of her depth, Kookaburra, the laughing jackass, cried out, "Gur gur gaga! Gur gur gaga! Give me a stick! Give me a stick!" But from the bank her sons only answered in derision, "Gur gur gaga! Gur gur gaga!" And the 3 hunters were soon engulfed in the rushing stream, drawn down by the current and drowned. End of chapter 11. Recording by David Lawrence in Brampton, Ontario, December 6th, 2008.
Chapter 12 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 12. The Mayama. The blacks had all left their camp and gone away to attend Bora. Nothing was left in the camp but one very old dog, too old to travel. After the blacks had been gone about 3 days, one night came their enemies, the Gooeys, intending to surprise them and kill them. Painted in all the glory of their war paint came the Gooeys, their hair tied in top knots and ornamented with feathers and kangaroo's teeth. Their waywahs of paddy, melon, and kangaroo rat skins cut in strips round their waists were new and strong, holding firmly some of their boomerangs and wagguras, which they had stuck through them. But prepared as they were for conquest, they found only a deserted camp containing naught but one old dog. They asked the old dog where the blacks were gone, but he only shook his head. Again and again they asked him, and again he only shook his head. At last some of the blackfellows raised their spears and their murillas or nulla nullas, saying, "If you don't tell us where the blacks are gone, we shall kill you." Then spoke the old dog, saying only, "Gone to the Bora." And as he spoke, every one of the Gooeys and everything they had with them was turned to stone. even the waywahs around their waist, the top knots on their heads and their spears in their hands, even these turned to stone. And when the blacks returned to their camp long afterwards, when the Bora was over, and the boys, who had been made young men, gone out into the bush to undergo their novitiate, each with his solitary guardian, then saw the blacks, their enemies, the Gooeys, standing around their old camp as if to attack it. But instead of being men of flesh, they were men of stone. They, their weapons, their waywahs, and all that belonged to them, stone. And at that place are to be found stones or mayamahs of great beauty, striped and marked and coloured as were the men painted. And the place of the mayamah is on one of the mounts near Beamery. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 13. The Bunbundalui. The mother Bunbundalui put her child, a little boy, Bunbundalui, who could just crawl, into her goulay. Goulay is a sort of small netted hammock, slung by black women on their backs, in which they carry their babies and goods in general. Bunbundalui, the pigeon, put her goulay across her back and started out hunting. When she had gone some distance, she came to a clump of bunya, or wattle trees. At the foot of one of these she saw some large ulamara, or grubs, which were good to catch. She picked some up and dug with her yam stick around the roots of the tree to get more. She went from tree to tree, getting grubs at every one. That she might gather them all, she put down her goulay and hunted further around. Soon, in the excitement of her search, she forgot the goulay with the child in it and wandered away. Further and further she went from the dunya clump, never once thinking of her poor Birrili, or baby. On and still on she went, until at length she reached a far country. The Birrili woke up and crawled out of the goulay. First he only crawled about, but soon he grew stronger and raised himself and stood by a tree. Then day by day he grew stronger and walked alone, and stronger still he grew and could run. Then he grew on into a big boy, and then into a man, and his mother he never saw while he was growing from Birrili to man. But in the far country at length one day, Bunbundalui, the mother, remembered the Birrili she had left. "Oh," she cried, "I forgot my Birrili. I left my Birrili where the dunyas grow in a far country. I must go to my Birrili. My poor Birrili, I forgot it. Mad must I have been when I forgot him. My Birrili, my Birrili." And away went the mother as fast as she could travel back to the dunya clump in the far country. When she reached the spot she saw the tracks of her Birrili, first crawling, then standing, then walking, and then running. Bigger and bigger were the tracks she followed, until she saw they were the tracks of a man. She followed them until she reached a camp. No one was in the camp, but a fire was there, so she waited, and while waiting looked around. She saw her son had made himself many weapons and many opossum rugs, which he had painted gaily inside. Then at last she saw a man coming towards the camp, and she knew he was her Birrili, grown into a man. As he drew near she ran out to meet him, saying, "Bunbundalui, I am your mother, the mother who forgot you as a Birrili and left you. But now I have come to find you, my son. Long was the journey, my son, and your mother was weary. But now that she sees once more her Birrili, who has grown into a man, she is no longer weary, but glad is her heart, and loud could she sing in her joy. Ah, Bunbundalui, my son, Bunbundalui, my son!" And she ran forward with her arms out as if to embrace him. But stern was the face of Bunbundalui the son, and no answer did he make with his tongue. But he stooped to the ground and picked therefrom a big stone. This swiftly he threw at his mother, hitting her with such force that she fell dead to the earth. Then on strode Bunbundalui to his camp. End of chapter 13.
Chapter 14 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker. Chapter 14. Oodnawar and Ginneray. Oodnawar the diver and Ginneray the eagle hawk told all the pelicans, black swans, cranes, and many others that they would take their net to the creek and catch fish, if some of them would go and beat the fish down towards the net. Gladly went the pelicans, black swans, and the rest to the creek. In they jumped, and splashed the water about to scare the fish down towards where Oodnawar and Ginneray were stationed with their net. Presently little Dee-ree-ree the wagtail, and Burrunjin the peewee, who were on the bank sitting on a stump, called out, "Look out, we saw the back of an alligator in the water." The diver and eagle hawk called back, "Go away then, the wind blows from you towards him, go back or he will smell you." But Dee-ree-ree and Burrunjin were watching the fish and did not heed what was said to them. Soon the alligator smelt them, and he lashed out with his tail, splashing the water so high and lashing so furiously that all the fishermen were drowned, even Dee-ree-ree and Burrunjin on the bank, not one escaped, and red was the bank of the creek, and red the stump whereon Dee-ree-ree and Burrunjin had sat, with the blood of the slain, and the place is called Goomade and is red forever. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker. Chapter 15. Narran the Bat. Narran the Bat wanted honey. He watched until he saw a warranana or bee alight. He caught it, stuck a white feather between its hind legs, let it go and followed it. He knew he could see the white feather, and so followed the bee to its nest. He ordered his 2 wives of the Bilber tribe to follow him with wherries to carry home the honey in. Night came on, and Warranana the bee had not reached home. Narran caught him, imprisoned him under bark, and kept him safely there until next morning. When it was light enough to see, Narran let the bee go again, and followed him to his nest in a gunniyunny tree. Marking the tree with his cumbo, that he might know it again, he returned to hurry on his wives who were some way behind. He wanted them to come on, climb the tree, and chop out the honey. When they reached the marked tree, one of the women climbed up. She called out to Narran that the honey was in a split in the tree. He called back to her to put her hand in it and get it out. She put her arm in, but found she could not get it out again. Narran climbed up to help her, but found when he reached her that the only way to free her was to cut off her arm. This he did before she had time to realize what he was going to do and protest. So great was the shock to her that she died instantly. Narran carried down her lifeless body and commanded her sister, his other wife, to go up, chop out the arm, and get the honey. She protested, declaring the bees would have taken the honey away by now. "Not so," he said, "go at once." Every excuse she could think of to save herself she made, but her excuses were in vain, and Narran only became furious with her for making them, and, brandishing his boondie, drove her up the tree. She managed to get her arm in beside her sister's, but there it stuck and she could not move it. Narran, who was watching her, saw what had happened and followed her up the tree. Finding he could not pull her arm out, in spite of her cries, he chopped it off as he done her sister's. After one shriek as he drove his cumbo through her arm, she was silent. He said, "Come down and I will chop out the bee's nest." But she did not answer him, and he saw that she too was dead. Then he was frightened, and climbed quickly down the gunny tree, taking her body to the ground with him. He laid it beside her sister's, and quickly he hurried from the spot, taking no further thought of the honey. As he neared his camp, two little sisters of his wives ran out to meet him, thinking their sisters would be with him, and that they would give them a taste of the honey they knew they had gone out to get. But to their surprise Narran came alone, and as he drew near to them they saw his arms were covered with blood, and his face had a fierce look on it, which frightened them from even asking where their sisters were. They ran and told their mother that Narran had returned alone, that he looked fierce and angry, also his arms were covered with blood. Out went the mother of the Bilbas, and she said, "Where are my daughters, Narran?" "Forth went they this morning to bring home the honey you found. You come back alone. You bring no honey. Your look is fierce, as of one who fights, and your arms are covered with blood. Tell me, I say, where are my daughters?" "Ask me not, Bilber. Ask Warrenunna the bee, he may know." "Narran the bat knows nothing," and he wrapped himself in a silence which no questioning could pierce. Leaving him there before his camp, the mother of the Bilbas returned to her dardor and told her tribe that her daughters were gone, and Narran, their husband, would tell her nothing of them. But she felt he knew their fate, and certain she was that he had some tale to tell, for his arms were covered with blood. The chief of her tribe listened to her. When she had finished and begun to wail for her daughters, whom she thought she would see no more, he said, "Mother of the Bilbas, your daughters shall be avenged if aught has happened to them at the hands of Narran. Fresh are his tracks, and the young men of your tribe shall follow whence they have come, and finding what Narran has done, swiftly shall they return. Then shall we hold a corrobboree, and if your daughters fell at his hand, Narran shall be punished." The mother of the Bilbas said, "Well have you spoken, O my relation. Now speed ye the young men, lest the rain fall or the dust blow and the tracks be lost." Then forth went the fleetest footed and the keenest eyed of the young men of the tribe. Ere long back they came to the camp with the news of the fate of the Bilbas. That night was the corrobboree held. The women sat round in a half circle and chanted a monotonous chant, keeping time by hitting, some of them, two boomerangs together, and others beating their rolled up opossum rugs. Big fires were lit on the edge of the scrub, throwing light on the dancers as they came dancing out from their camps, painted in all manner of designs, waywahs round their waist, tufts of feathers in their hair, and carrying in their hands painted wands. Heading the procession as the men filed out from the scrub into a cleared space in front of the women, came Narran. The light of the fires lit up the tree tops, the dark balas showed out in fantastic shapes, and weird indeed was the scene as slowly the men danced round. Louder clicked the boomerangs, and louder grew the chanting of the women. Higher were the fires piled, until the flames shot their coloured tongues round the trunks of the trees and high into the air. One fire was bigger than all, and towards it the dancers edged Narran. Then the voice of the mother of the Bilbas shrieked in the chanting, high above that of the other women. As Narran turned from the fire to dance back, he found a wall of men confronting him. These quickly seized him and hurled him into the madly leaping fire before him, where he perished in the flames, and so were the Bilbas avenged. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker. Chapter 16. Malianga the Morning Star. Malian, the Eagle Hawk, built himself a home high in a yarran tree. There he lived apart from his tribe, with Moodah the Opossum his wife, and Moodah the Opossum his mother-in-law. With them too was Buttergar, a daughter of the Bagoo, or Flying Squirrel tribe. Buttergar was a friend of Moodah, the wife of Malian, and a distant cousin to the Moodah tribe. Malian the Eaglehawk was a cannibal. That was the reason of his living apart from the other blacks. In order to satisfy his cannibal cravings, he used to sally forth with a big spear, a spear about 4 times as big as an ordinary spear. If he found a black fellow hunting alone, he would kill him and take his body up to the house in the tree. There the Moodah and Buttergub will cook it, and all of them would eat the flesh, for the women as well as Malian were cannibals. This went on for some time, until at last so many black fellows were slain that their friends determined to find out what became of them, and they tracked the last one they missed. They tracked him to where he had evidently been slain. They took up the tracks of his slayer, and followed them right to the foot of the yarran tree, in which was built the home of Malian. They tried to climb the tree, but it was high and straight, and they gave up the attempt after many efforts. In their despair at their failure they thought of the Bibbies, a tribe noted for its climbing powers. They summoned 2 young Bibbies to their aid. One came bringing with him his friend Marrawanda of the climbing rat tribe. Having heard what the blacks wanted them to do, these famous climbers went to the yarran tree and made a start at once. There was only light enough that first night for them to see to reach a fork in the tree about halfway up. There they camped, watched Malian away in the morning, and then climbed on. At last they reached the home of Malian. They watched their chance and then sneaked into his humpy. When they were safely inside, they hastened to secrete a smouldering stick in one end of the humpy, taking care they were not seen by any of the women. Then they went quietly down again, no one the wiser of their coming or going. During the day the women heard sometimes a crackling noise, as of burning, but looked round they saw nothing, and as their own fire was safe, they took no notice, thinking it might have been caused by some grass having fallen into their fire. After their descent from having hidden the smouldering fire stick, Bibby and Marrawanda found the blacks and told them what they had done. Hearing that the plan was to burn out Malian, and fearing that the tree might fall, they all moved to some little distance, there to watch and wait for the end. Great was their joy at the thought that at last their enemy was circumvented, and proud were Bibby and Marrawanda, as the blackfellows praised their prowess. After dinner time Malian came back. When he reached the entrance to his house he put down his big spear outside. Then he went in and threw himself down to rest, for long had he walked and little had he gained. In a few minutes he heard his big spear fall down. He jumped up and stuck it in its place again. He had no sooner thrown himself down than again he heard it fall. Once more he rose and replaced it. As he reached his resting place again, out burst a flame of fire from the end of his humpy. He called out to the 3 women who were cooking, and they rushed to help him extinguish the flames. But, in spite of their efforts, the fire only blazed the brighter. Malian's arm was burnt off, the Moodah had their feet burnt, and Buttergar was badly burnt too. Seeing they were helpless against the fire, they turned to leave the humpy to its fate, and make good their own escape. But they had left it too late. As they turned to descend the tree, the roof of the humpy fell on them, and all that remained when the fire ceased were the charred bones of the dwellers in the yarran tree. That was all that the blacks found of their enemies, but their legend says that Malian the eagle hawk lives in the sky as Maliunga the morning star, on one side of which is a little star, which is his one arm, on the other a larger star, which is Moodar the opossum his wife. End of chapter 16.
Chapter 17 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 17. Goomblegubbon the Bustard, his two wives, Biaga the Hawk and Uyan the Curlew, with the two children of Biaga, had their camps right away in the bush. Their only water supply was a small dungle, or gilgai hole. The wives and children camped in one camp, and Goomblegubbon a short distance off in another. One day the wives asked their husband to lend them the diul stone, that they might grind some doom bird to make durry, but he would not lend it to them. Though they asked him several times, they knew he did not want to use it himself, for they saw his durry on a piece of bark between two fires, already cooking. They determined to be revenged, so said, "We will make some water bags of the opossum skins, we will fill them with water, and some day when Goomblegubbon is out hunting we will empty the dungle of water, take the children and run away. When he returns he will find his wives and children gone and the dungle empty. Then he will be sorry that he would not lend us a diul." The wives soon caught some opossums, killed and skinned them, plucked all the hair from the skins, saving it to roll into string to make gumillas, cleaned the skins of all flesh, sewed them up with the sinews, leaving only the neck opening. When they finished they blew into them, filled them with air, tied them up and left them to dry for a few days. When they were dry and ready to be used, they chose today when Goomblegubbon was away, filled the water bags, emptied the dungle, and started towards the river. Having travelled for some time, they at length reached the river. They saw two black fellows on the other side, who, when they saw the runaway wives and the two children, swam over to them and asked whence they had come and whither they were going. "We are running away from our husband Goomblegubbon, who would lend us no diul to grind our doombur on, and we ran away lest we and our children should starve, for we could not live on meat alone. But whither we are going we know not, except that it must be far away, lest Goomblegubbon follow and kill us." The blackfellows said they wanted wives, and would each take one and both care for the children. The women agreed. The blackfellows swam back across the river, each taking a child first, and then a woman, for as they came from the back country, where no creeks were, the women could not swim. Goomblegubbon came back from hunting, and seeing no wives called aloud for them, but heard no answer. Then he went to their camp and found them not. Then turning towards the dungle he saw that it was empty. Then he saw the tracks of his wives and children going towards the river. Great was his anger, and vowing he would kill them when he found them, he picked up his spears and followed their tracks, until he too reached the river. There on the other side he saw a camp, and in it he could see strange blackfellows, his wives and his children. He called aloud for them to cross him over, for he too could not swim. But the sun went down, and still they did not answer. He camped where he was that night, and in the morning he saw the camp opposite had been deserted and set fire to. The country all around was burnt, so that not even the tracks of the blackfellows and his wives could be found, even had he been able to cross the river, and never again did he see or hear of his wives or children. End of chapter 17.
Chapter 18 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Evan Barnes. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 18. Morrigu the Mopoke, and Balu the Moon. Morrigu the Mopoke had been camped away by himself for a long time. While alone, he had made a great number of boomerangs, nulla-nullas, spears, nailamans, and opossum rugs. Well had he carved the weapons with the teeth of opossums, and brightly had he painted the inside of the rugs with colored designs, and strongly had he sewn them with the sinews of opossums, threaded in the needle made of the little bone taken from the leg of an emu. As Morrigu looked at his work, he was proud of all he had done. One night, Balu the Moon came to his camp and said, "Lend me one of your opossum rugs." "No, I lend not my rugs." "Then give me one." "No, I give not my rugs." Looking round, Balu saw the beautifully carved weapons, so he said, "Then give me, Morrigu, some of your weapons." "No, I give never what I have made to another." Again Balu said, "The night is cold. Lend me a rug." "I have spoken," said Morrigu. "I never lend my rugs." Balu said no more, but went away, cut some bark, and made a darter for himself. When it was finished, and he safely housed in it, down came the rain in torrents, and it rained without ceasing until the whole country was flooded. Morrigu was drowned. His weapons floated about and drifted apart, and his rugs rotted in the water. End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker. Chapter 19. Uryan the Curlew. Biaga the Hawk, mother of Uryan the Curlew, said one day to her son, "Go, Uryan, take your spears and kill an emu. The women and I are hungry. You are a man, go out and kill that we may eat. You must not stay always in the camp like an old woman. You must go and hunt as other men do, lest the women laugh at you." Uryan took his spears and went out hunting, but though he went far, he could not get an emu. Yet he dare not return to the camp and face the jeers of the women. Well could they jeer, and angry could his mother grow when she was hungry. Sooner than return empty-handed, he would cut some flesh off his own legs, and this he decided to do. He made a cut in his leg with his combo, and as he made it, cried aloud, "Yakay, yakay," in pain. Sharper would cut the tongues of the women, and deeper would be the wounds they would make, if I returned without food for them. And crying, "Yakay, yakay," at each stroke of his combo, he at length cut off a piece of flesh and started towards the camp with it. As he neared the camp, his mother cried out, "What have you brought us, Uryan? We starve for meat. Come quickly." He came and laid the flesh at her feet, saying, "Far did I go, and little did I see, but there is enough for all tonight. Tomorrow will I go forth again." The women cooked the flesh and ate it hungrily. Afterwards they felt quite ill, but thought it must be because they had eaten too hungrily. The next day they hurried Uryan forth again, and again he returned bringing his own flesh back. Again the women ate hungrily off it, and again they felt quite ill. Then too Biaga noticed for the first time that the flesh Uryan brought looked different from emu flesh. She asked him what flesh it was. He replied, "What should it be but the flesh of an emu?" But Biaga was not satisfied, and she said to the two women who lived with her, "Go you tomorrow, follow Uryan, and see whence he gets his flesh." The next day the two women followed Uryan when he went forth to hunt. They followed at a good distance, that he might not notice that they were following. Soon they heard him crying as if in pain, "Yakay, yakay, yakay, nuragay." When they came near, they saw he was cutting the flesh off his own limbs. Before he discovered that they were watching him, back they went to the old woman and told her what they had seen. Soon Uryan came back, bringing as usual the flesh with him. When he had thrown it down at his mother's feet, he went away, and lay down as if tired from the chase. His mother went up to him, and before he had time to cover his mutilated limbs, she saw that indeed the story of the women was true.
Angry was she that he had so deceived her, and she called loudly for the other 2 women, who came running to her. "You are right," she said. "Too lazy to hunt for emu, he cut off his own flesh, not caring that when we unwittingly ate thereof we should sicken. Let us beat him who did us this wrong." The 3 women seized poor Urien and beat him, though he cried aloud in agony when the blows fell on his bleeding legs. When the women had satisfied their vengeance, Biaga said, "You, Urien, shall have no more flesh on your legs, and red shall they be forever, red and long and fleshless," saying when she went, and with her the other women. Urien crawled away and hid himself, and never again did his mother see him. But night after night was to be heard a wailing cry of "Buyoo, gwai gwai, buyoo, gwai gwai," which meant, "My poor red legs, my poor red legs." But though Urien the man was never seen again, a bird with long thin legs, very red in colour under the feathers, was seen often, and heard to cry ever at night, even as Urien the man had cried, "Buyoo, gwai gwai, buyoo, gwai gwai," and this bird bears always the name of Urien. End of chapter 19.
Chapter 20 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Evan Barnes. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 20. Denny Wan the Emu and Wan the Crows. Denny Wan and his 2 wives, the Wan, were camping out. Seeing some clouds gathering, they made a bark humpy. It came on to rain, and they all took shelter under it. Denny Wan, when his wives were not looking, gave a kick against a piece of bark at one side of the humpy, knocked it down, then told his wives to go and put it up again. When they were outside putting it up, he gave a kick, and knocked down a piece on the other side. So no sooner were they in again than out they had to go. This he did time after time, until at last they suspected him, and decided that one of them would watch. The one who was watching saw Denny Wan laugh to himself, and go and knock down the bark they had just put up, chuckling at the thought of his wives having to go out in the wet and cold to put it up, while he had his supper dry and comfortably inside. The one who saw him told the other, and they decided to teach him a lesson. So in they came, each with a piece of bark filled with hot coals. They went straight up to Denny Wan, who was lying down laughing. "Now," they said, "you shall feel as hot as we did cold." And they threw the coals over him. Denny Wan jumped up, crying aloud with the pain, for he was badly burnt. He rolled himself over and ran into the rain, and his wives stayed inside and laughed aloud at him. End of chapter 20.
Chapter 21 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 21. Goolawilil the Top-Knot Pigeons. Young Goolawilil used to go out hunting every day. His mother and sisters always expected that he would bring home kangaroo and emu for them, but each day he came home without any meat at all. They asked him what he did in the bush, as he evidently did not hunt. He said that he did hunt. "Then why," said they, "do you bring us nothing home?" "I cannot catch and kill what I follow," he said. "You hear me cry out when I find kangaroo or emu, is it not so?" "Yes, each day we hear you call when you find something, and each day we get ready the fire, expecting you to bring home the spoils of the chase, but you bring nothing." "Tomorrow," he said, "you shall not be disappointed. I will bring you a kangaroo." Every day, instead of hunting, Goolawilil had been gathering wattle gum, and with this he had been modelling a kangaroo. A perfect model of one, tail, ears, and all complete. So the next day he came towards the camp carrying this kangaroo made of gum. Seeing him coming, and also seeing that he was carrying the promised kangaroo, his mother and sisters said, "Ah, Gulliwhilli spoke truly. He has kept his word, and now brings us a kangaroo. Pile up the fire. Tonight we shall eat meat." About 100 yards away from the camp, Gulliwhilli put down his model and came on without it. His mother called out, "Where is the kangaroo you brought home?" "Oh, over there," and he pointed towards where he had left it. The sisters ran to get it, but came back saying, "Where is it? We cannot see it." "Over there," he said, pointing again. "But there is only a great figure of gum there." "Well, did I say it was anything else? Did I not say it was gum?" "No, you did not. You said it was a kangaroo. And so it is a kangaroo, a beautiful kangaroo that I made all by myself." And he smiled quite proudly to think what a fine kangaroo he had made. But his mother and sisters did not smile. They seized him and gave him a good beating for deceiving them. They told him he should never go out alone again, for he only played instead of hunting, though he knew they starved for meat. They would always in the future go with him. And so for ever the Gulliwhillis went in flocks, never more singly, in search of food. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 22. Gnu the Woman Doctor. Gnu was a clever old woman doctor who lived with her son, Gnu, and his 2 wives. The wives were Gooda the red lizard, and Burian the small prickly lizard. One day the 2 wives had done something to anger Gnu, their husband, and he gave them both a great beating. After their beating they went away by themselves. They said to each other that they could stand their present life no longer, and yet there was no escape unless they killed their husband. They decided they would do that, but how? That was the question. It must be cunning. At last they decided on a plan. They dug a big hole in the sand near the creek, filled it with water, and covered the hole over with boughs, leaves, and grass. "Now we will go," they said, "and tell our husband that we found a big bandicoot's nest." Back they went to the camp, and told Gnu that they had seen a big nest of bandicoots near the creek, that if he sneaked up he would be able to surprise them and get the lot. Off went Gnu in great haste. He sneaked up to within a couple of feet of the nest, then gave a spring on to the top of it, and only when he felt the bough top give in with him and he sank down into the water did he realize that he had been tricked. Too late then to save himself, for he was drowning and could not escape. His wives had watched the success of their stratagem from a distance. When they were certain that they had effectually disposed of their hated husband, they went back to the camp. Gnu the mother soon missed her son, made inquiries of his wives, but gained no information from them. 2 or 3 days passed, and yet Gnu the son returned not. Seriously alarmed at his long absence, without having given her notice of his intention, the mother determined to follow his tracks. She took up his trail where she had last seen him leave the camp. This she followed until she reached the so-called bandicoot's nest. Here his tracks disappeared, and nowhere could she find a sign of his having returned from this place. She felt in the hole with her yarn stick, and soon felt that there was something large there in the water. She cut a forked stick and tried to raise the body and get it out, for she felt sure it must be her son, but she could not raise it. Stick after stick broke in the effort. At last she cut a midgie stick and tried with that, and then she was successful. When she brought out the body she found it was indeed her son. She dragged the body to an ant bed and watched intently to see if the stings of the ants brought any sign of returning life. Soon her hope was realized, and after a violent twitching of the muscles her son regained consciousness. As soon as he was able to do so he told her of the trick his wives had played on him. Gnu the mother was furious. "No more shall they have you as husband. You shall live hidden in my dadur. When we get near the camp you can get into this long big combi, and I will take you in. When you want to go hunting I will take you from the camp in this combi, and when we are out of sight you can get out and hunt as of old." And thus they managed for some time to keep his return a secret, and little the wives knew that their husband was alive and in his mother's camp. But as day after day Gnu the mother returned from hunting loaded with spoils, they began to think she must have help from someone, for surely, they said, no old woman could be so successful in hunting. There was a mystery, they were sure, and they were determined to find it out. See, they said, she goes out alone, she's old, and yet she brings home more than we two do together, and we are young. Today she brought opossums, piggy billars, honey yams, quotha, and many things. We got little, yet we went far. We will watch her. The next time old Gnu went out carrying her big combi, the wives watched her. Look, they said, how slowly she goes. She could not climb trees for opossums. She's too old and weak. Look how she staggers. They went cautiously after her, and saw when she was some distance from the camp that she put down her combi, and out of it to their amazement stepped Gnu, their husband. Ah, they said, this is her secret. She must have found him, and as she is a great doctor she was able to bring him to life again. We must wait until she leaves him, and then go to him and beg to know where he has been, and pretend joy that he is back, or else surely now he is alive again he will sometime kill us. Accordingly, when Gnu was alone, the two wives ran to him and said, Why, Gnu, our husband, did you leave us? Where have you been all the time that we our wives have mourned for you? Long has the time been without you, and we your wives have been sad that you came no more to our dadu. Gnu the husband affected to believe their sorrow was genuine, and that they did not know when they directed him into the bandicoot's nest that it was a trap, which trap but for his mother might have been his grave. They all went hunting together, and when they had killed enough for food they returned to the camp. As they came near to the camp, Gnu the mother saw them coming and cried out, Would you again be tricked by your wives? Did I save you from death only that you might again be killed? I spared them, but I would have slain them if again they are to have a chance of killing you, my son. Many are the wiles of women, and another time I might not be able to save you. Let them live if you will it so, my son, but not with you. They try to lure you to death. You are no longer theirs, mine only now, for did I not bring you back from the dead? But Gnu the husband said, In truth did you save me, my mother, and these my wives rejoice that you did. They too, as I was, were deceived by the bandicoot's nest, the work of an enemy yet to be found. See, my mother, do not the looks of love in their eyes and the words of love on their lips vouch for their truth? We will be as we have been, my mother, and live again in peace. And thus craftily did Gnu the husband deceive his wives and make them believe he trusted them wholly, while in reality his mind was even then plotting vengeance. In a few days he had his plans ready. Having cut and pointed sharply 2 stakes, he stuck them firmly in the creek. Then he placed 2 logs on the bank in front of the sticks, which were underneath the water and invisible. Having made his preparations, he invited his wives to come for a bathe. He said when they reached the creek, See those 2 logs on the bank? You jump in each from one and see which can dive the furthest. I will go first to see you as you come up, and in he jumped, carefully avoiding the pointed stakes. Right, he called, all is clear here, jump in. Then the 2 wives ran down the bank, each to a log, and jumped from it. Well had Gnu calculated the distance, for both jumped right on to the stakes placed in the water to catch them, and which stuck firmly into them, holding them under the water. Well, I am avenged, said Gnu. No more will my wives lay traps to catch me, and he walked off to the camp. His mother asked him where his wives were. They left me, he said, to get bees' nests. But as day by day passed, and the wives returned not, the old woman began to suspect that her son knew more than he said. She asked him no more, but quietly watched her opportunity when her son was away hunting, and then followed the tracks of the wives. She tracked them to the creek, and as she saw no tracks of their return, she went into the creek, felt about, and there found the 2 bodies fast on the stakes. She managed to get them off and out of the creek. Then she determined to try and restore them to life, for she was angry that her son had not told her what he had done, but had deceived her as well as his wives. She rubbed the women with some of her medicines, dressed the wounds made by the stakes, and then dragged them both on to the ants' nest, and watched their bodies as the ants crawled over them, biting them. She had not long to wait. Soon they began to move and come to life again. As soon as they were restored, Gnu took them back to the camp and said to Gnu her son, Now once did I use my knowledge to restore life to you, and again have I used it to restore life to your wives. You are all mine now, and I desire that you live in peace and never more deceive me, or never again shall I use my skill for you. And they lived for a long while together, and when the mother doctor died, there was a beautiful, dazzlingly bright falling star, followed by a sound as a sharp clap of thunder, and all the tribes around when they saw and heard this said, A great doctor must have died, for that is the sign. and when the wives died they were taken up to the sky, where they are now known as Guabala, the Red Star, so called from its bright red colour, owing, the legend says, to the red marks left by the stakes on the bodies of the two women, and which nothing could efface. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 23. Diriri the Wagtail and the Rainbow. Diriri was a widow and lived in a camp alone with her 4 little girls. One day Bibi came and made a camp not far from hers. Diriri was frightened of him, too frightened to go to sleep. All night she used to watch his camp, and if she heard a sound she would cry aloud, "Diriri, wire, wire, Diriri!" Sometimes she would be calling out nearly all night. In the morning Bibi would come over to her camp and ask her what was the matter that she had called out so in the night. She told him that she thought she heard someone walking about and was afraid, for she was alone with her 4 little girls. He told her she ought not be afraid with all her children round her, but night after night she sat up crying, "Wire, wire, Diriri, Diriri!" At last Bibi said, "If you are so frightened, marry me and live in my camp. I will take care of you." But Diriri said she did not want to marry. So night after night was to be heard her plaintive cry of "Wire, wire, Diriri, Diriri!" And again Bibi pressed her to share his camp and marry him. But she always refused. The more she refused, the more he wished to marry her, and he used to wonder how he could induce her to change her mind. At last he thought of a plan of surprising her into giving her consent. He set to work and made a beautiful and many-coloured arch, which when it was made he called Ulawiri, and he placed it right across the sky, reaching from one side of the earth to the other. When the rainbow was firmly placed in the sky, and showing out in all its brilliancy of many colours as a roadway from the earth to the stars, Bibi went into his camp to wait. When Diriri looked up at the sky and saw the wonderful rainbow, she thought something dreadful must be going to happen. She was terribly frightened, and called out, "Wire, wire!" In her fear she gathered her children together and fled with them to Bibi's camp for protection. Bibi proudly told her that he had made the rainbow, just to show how strong he was and how safe she would be if she married him. But if she would not, she would see what terrible things he would make to come on the earth. Not just a harmless and beautiful roadway across the heavens, but things that would burst from the earth and destroy it. So by working on her mixed feelings of fear of his prowess and admiration of his skill, Bibi gained his desire, and Diriri married him. And when long afterwards they died, Diriri was changed into a little willy wagtail, who may be heard through the stillness of the summer nights crying her plaintive wail of "Diriri, wire, wire, Diriri!" And Bibi was changed into the woodpecker, or climbing tree bird, who is always running up trees, as if he wanted to be building other ways to the famous roadway of his Ulawiri, the building of which had won him his wife. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 24. Mooragoo the Mapoki, and Mooninguggle the Mosquito Bird. An old man lived with his 2 wives, the Mooninguggle sisters, and his 2 sons. The old man spent all his time making boomerangs, until at last he had 4 nets full of these weapons. The 2 boys used to go out hunting opossums and iguanas, which they would cook in the bush and eat, without thinking of bringing any home to their parents. The old man asked them one day to bring him home some fat to rub his boomerangs with. This the boys did, but they brought only the fat, having eaten the rest of the iguanas from which they had taken the fat. The old man was very angry that his sons were so greedy, but he said nothing, though be determined to punish them, for he thought, when they were young and could not hunt, I hunted for them and fed them well. Now that they can hunt and I am old and cannot so well, they give me nothing." Thinking of his treatment at the hands of his sons, he greased all his boomerangs, and when he had finished them he said to the boys, "You take these boomerangs down onto the plain and try them. See if I have made them well. Then come back and tell me. I will stay here." The boys took the boomerangs. They threw them one after another, but to their surprise not one of the boomerangs they threw touched the ground, but instead went whirling up out of sight. When they had finished throwing the boomerangs, all of which acted in the same way, whirling up through space, they prepared to start home again. But as they looked round they saw a huge whirlwind coming towards them. They were frightened and called out, "Warrawilbaroo!" for they knew there was a devil in the whirlwind. They laid hold of trees near at hand, that it might not catch them, but the whirlwind spread out first one arm and rooted up one tree, then another arm and rooted up another. The boys ran in fear from tree to tree, but each tree that they went to was torn up by the whirlwind. At last they ran to two mabu or beefwood trees, and clung tightly to them. After them rushed the whirlwind, sweeping all before it, and when it reached the mabu trees to which the boys were clinging, it tore them from their roots and bore them upward swiftly, giving the boys no time to leave go, so they were borne upward clinging to the mabu trees. On the whirlwind bore them until they reached the sky, where it placed the two trees with the boys still clinging to them, and there they still are, near the Milky Way, and known as Warrawilbaroo. The boomerangs are scattered all along the Milky Way, for the whirlwind had gathered them all together in its rush through space. Having placed them all in the sky, down came the whirlwind, retaking its natural shape, which was that of the old man, for so had he wreaked his vengeance on his son for neglecting their parents. As time went on, the mothers wondered why their sons did not return. It struck them as strange that the old man expressed no surprise at the absence of the boys, and they suspected that he knew more than he cared to say, for he only sat in the camp smiling while his wives discussed what could have happened to them, and he let the women go out and search alone. The mothers tracked their sons to the plain. There they saw that a big whirlwind had lately been, for trees were uprooted and strewn in every direction. They tracked their sons from tree to tree until at last they came to the place where the mabus had stood. They saw the tracks of the sons beside the places whence the trees had been uprooted, but of these trees and their sons they saw no further trace. Then they knew that they had all been borne up together by the whirlwind, and taken whither they knew not. Sadly they returned to their camp. When night came they heard cries which they recognized as made by the voices of their sons, though they sounded as if they were coming from the sky. As the cries sounded again, the mothers looked up whence they came, and there they saw the mabu trees, with their sons beside them. Then well they knew that they would see no more their sons on earth, and great was their grief, and wroth were they with their husband, for well they knew now that he must have been the devil in the whirlwind, who had so punished the boys. They vowed to avenge the loss of their boys. The next day they went out and gathered a lot of pine gum, and brought it back to the camp. When they reached the camp, the old man called to one of his wives to come and tease his hair, as his head ached, and that alone would relieve the pain. One of the women went over to him, took his head on her lap, and teased his hair until at last the old man was soothed and sleepy. In the meantime the other wife was melting the gum. The one with the old man gave her a secret sign to come near. Then she asked the old man to lie on his back that she might tease his front hair better. As he did so, she signed to the other woman, who quickly came, gave her some of the melted gum, which they both then poured hot into his eyes, filling them with it. In agony the old man jumped up and ran about, calling out, "Morrigu, Morrigu," as he ran. Out of the camp he ran and far away, still crying out in his agony as he went. And never again did his wife see him, though every night they heard his cry of "Morrigu, Morrigu." But though they never saw their husband, they saw a night hawk, the mopoke, and as that cried always, "Morrigu, Morrigu," as their husband had cried in his agony, they knew that he must have turned into that bird. After a time the women were changed into mooninguggagool, or mosquito birds. These birds are marked on the wings just like a mosquito, and every summer night you can hear them cry out incessantly, "Mooninguggagool," which cry is the call for the mosquitoes to answer by coming out and buzzing in chorus, and as quickly the mosquitoes come out in answer to the summons, the mooninguggagool bid them fly everywhere and bite all they can. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 25. Piccaninnies the Rainbird. Piccaninnies was an old woman who lived alone with her 400 dingoes. From living so long with these dogs, she had grown not to care for her fellow creatures except as food. She and the dogs lived on human flesh, and it was her cunning which gained such food for them all. She would sally forth from her camp with her 2 little dogs. She would be sure to meet some blackfellows, probably 20 or 30, going down to the creek. She would say, "I can tell you where there are lots of paddy melons." They would ask where, and she would answer, "Over there, on the point of that marilla or ridge. If you will go there and have your nullahs ready, I will go with my 2 dogs and round them up towards you." The blackfellows invariably stationed themselves where she told them, and off went Piccaninnies and her 2 dogs. But not to round up the paddy melons. She went quickly towards her camp, calling softly, "Biree goo," which meant "Sulum, Sulum," and was the signal for the dogs to come out. Quickly they came and surrounded the blackfellows, took them by surprise, flew at them, bit and worried them to death. Then they and Piccaninnies dragged their bodies to the camp. There they were cooked and were food for the old woman and the dogs for some time. As soon as the supply was finished, the same plan to obtain more was repeated. The blackfellows missed so many of their friends that they determined to find out what had become of them. They began to suspect the old woman who lived alone and hunted over the marillas with her 2 little dogs. They proposed that the next party that went to the creek should divide, and some stay behind in hiding and watch what went on. Those watching saw the old woman advance towards their friends, talk to them for a while, and then go off with her 2 dogs. They saw their friends station themselves at the point of the marilla or ridge, holding their nullahs in readiness, as if waiting for something to come. Presently they heard a low cry from the old woman of "Biree goo," which cry was quickly followed by dingoes coming out of the bush in every direction, in hundreds, surrounding the blackfellows at the point. The dingoes closed in, quickly hemming the blackfellows in all round. Then they made a simultaneous rush at them, tore them with their teeth and killed them. The blackfellows watching saw that when the dogs had killed their friends, they were joined by the old woman, who helped them to drag off the bodies to their camp. Having seen all this, back went the watchers to their tribe, and told what they had seen. All the tribes round mustered up and decided to execute a swift vengeance. In order to do so, out they sallied well armed. A detachment went on to entrap the dogs and Piccaninnies. Then, just when the usual massacre of the blacks was to begin, and the dogs were closing in round them for the purpose, out rushed over 200 blackfellows, and so effectual was their attack that every dog was killed, as well as Piccaninnies and her 2 little dogs. The old woman lay where she had been slain, but as the blacks went away they heard her cry, "Piccaninnies!" So back they went and broke her bones. First they broke her legs and then left her, but again as they went they heard her cry, "Piccaninnies!" Then back again they came, and again, until at last every bone in her body was broken. But still she cried, "Piccaninnies!" So one man waited beside her to see whence came the sound, for surely they thought she must be dead. He saw her heart move and cry again, "Piccaninnies!" And as it cried, out came a little bird from it. This little bird runs on the marillas and calls at night, "Piccaninnies!" All day it stays in one place, and only at night comes out. It is a little greyish bird, something like a weeder. The blacks call it Rainmaker, for if one steals its eggs it cries out incessantly, "Piccaninnies!" until in answer to its call the rain falls. And when the country is stricken with a drought, the blacks look for one of these little birds, and finding it, chase it until it cries aloud, "Piccaninnies! Piccaninnies!" And when they hear its cry in the daytime, they know rain will soon fall. As the little bird flew from the heart of the woman, all the dead dingoes were changed into snakes, many different kinds, all poisonous. The 2 little dogs were changed into diolminia, a very small kind of carpet snake, non-poisonous, for these 2 little dogs had never bitten the blacks as the other dogs had done. At the points of the marillas, where Piccaninnies and her dingoes used to slay the blacks, are heaps of white stones, which are supposed to be the fossilized bones of the massacred one. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker. Chapter 26. The Borer of Biome. Word had been passed from tribe to tribe telling how the season was good. There must be a great gathering of the tribes, and the place fixed for the gathering was Gugurawan. The old men whispered that it should be the occasion for a borer, but this the women must not know. Old Biome, who was a great Wareenan, said he would take his 2 sons, Gindahindimoe and Boomahumanoe, to the gathering of the tribes, for the time had come when they should be made young men, that they might be free to marry wives, eat emu flesh, and learn to be warriors. As tribe after tribe arrived at Gugurawan, each took up a position at one of the various points of the ridges, surrounding the clear open space where the corroborees were to be. The Wan, crows, had one point, the Demur, pigeons, another, the Marti, dogs, another, and so on. Biome and his tribe, Biamul the black swan's tribe, Ubon the blue-tongued lizard, and many other chiefs and their tribes, each had their camp on a different point. When all had arrived there were hundreds and hundreds assembled, and many and varied were the nightly corroborees, each tribe trying to excel the other in the fancifulness of their painted get-up and the novelty of their newest song and dance. By day there was much hunting and feasting, by night much dancing and singing. Pledges of friendship exchanged, a dilly bag for a boomerang, and so on. Young daughters given to old warriors, old women given to young men, unborn girls promised to old men, babies in arms promised to grown men. Many and diverse were the compacts entered into, and always were the Wareenan or doctors of the tribes consulted. After some days the Wareenan told the men of the tribes that they were going to hold a borer, but on no account must the Inur or women know. Day by day they must all go forth as if to hunt, and then prepare in secret the borer ground. Out went the men each day. They cleared a very large circle quite clear, then they built an earthen dam round this circle, and cleared a pathway leading into the thick bush from the circle, and built a dam on either side of this pathway. When all these preparations were finished, they had as usual a corroboree at night. After this had been going on for some time, one of the old Wareenan walked right away from the crowd as if he was sulky. He went to his camp, to where he was followed by another Wareenan, and presently the 2 old fellows began fighting. Suddenly, when the attention of the blacks was fixed on this fight, there came a strange whizzing, whirring noise from the scrub around. The women and children shrank together, for the sudden uncanny noise frightened them, and they knew that it was made by the spirits who were coming to assist at the initiation of the boys into young manhood. The noise really sounded, if you had not the dread of spirits in your mind, just as if someone had a circular piece of wood at the end of a string and were whirling it round and round. As the noise went on, the women said in an awe-stricken tone, "Garaimi!" that is, borer devil, and clutched their children tighter to them. The boys said, "Gayandi!" and their eyes extended with fear. Gayandi meant borer devil too. But the women must not even use the same word as the boys and men to express the borer spirit, for all concerning the mysteries of borer are sacred from the ears, eyes, or tongues of women. The next day a shift was made of the camps. They were moved to inside the big ring that the blackfellows had made. This move was attended with a certain amount of ceremony. In the afternoon, before the move had taken place, all the blackfellows left their camps and went away into the scrub. Then just about sundown they were all to be seen walking in single file out of the scrub, along the path which they had previously banked on each side. Every man had a fire stick in one hand and a green switch in the other. When these men reached the middle of the enclosed ring was the time for the young people and women to leave the old camps and move into the borer ring. Inside this ring they made their camps, had their suppers, and corroboreed, as on previous evenings, up to a certain stage. Before, on this occasion, that stage arrived, Biome, who was greatest of the Wareenan present, had shown his power in a remarkable way. For some days the Marti had been behaving with a great want of respect for the wise men of the tribes. Instead of treating their sayings and doings with the silent awe the Wareenan expect, they had kept up an incessant chatter and laughter amongst themselves, playing and shouting as if the tribes were not contemplating the solemnization of their most sacred rites. Frequently the Wareenan sternly bade them be silent, but admonitions were useless. Gaily chattered and laughed the Marti. At length Biame, mightiest and most famous of the Renan, rose, strode over to the camp of Marty, and said fiercely to them, I, Biame, whom all the tribes hold in honour, have thrice bade you, Marty, cease your chatter and laughter, but ye heeded me not. To my voice were added the voices of the Renan of other tribes, but ye heeded not. Think you the Renan will make any of your tribe young men when ye heed not their words? No, I tell you, from this day forth no Marty shall speak again as men speak. You wish to make noise, to be a noisy tribe and a disturber of men, a tribe who cannot keep quiet when strangers are in the camp, a tribe who understand not sacred things? So be it, you shall, and your descendants, for ever make a noise. But it shall not be the noise of speech, or the noise of laughter. It shall be the noise of barking and the noise of howling. And from this day, if ever a Marty speaks, woe to those who hear him, for even as they hear shall they be turned to stone. And as the Marty opened their mouths and tried to laugh and speak derisive words, they found, even as Biame said, so were they. They could but bark and howl. The powers of speech and laughter had they lost. And as they realized their loss, into their eyes came a look of yearning and dumb entreaty, which will be seen in the eyes of their descendants forever. A feeling of wonder and awe fell on the various camps as they watched Biame march back to his tribe. When Biame was seated again in his camp, he asked the women why they were not grinding doonbur, and the women said, Gone are our dayals, and we know not where. You lie, said Biame. You have lent them to the demur, who came so often to borrow, though I bade you not lend. No, Biame, we lent them not. Go to the camp of the demur and ask for your dayal. The women, with a fear of the fate of the Marty did they disobey, went, though they well knew they had not lent the dayal. As they went, they asked at each camp if the tribe there would lend them a dayal, but at each camp they were given the same answer, namely that the dayals were gone and none knew where. The demur had asked to borrow them, and in each instance been refused, yet had the stones gone. As the women went on, they heard a strange noise, as of the cry of spirits, a sound like a smothered The cry sounded high in the air through the tops of trees and low on the ground through the grasses, until it seemed as if the spirits were everywhere. The women clutched tighter their fire sticks and said, Let us go back, the Wanda are about. And swiftly they sped towards their camp, hearing ever in the air the of the spirits. They told Biame that all the tribes had lost their dayals and that the spirits were about, and even as they spoke came the sound of at the back of their own camp. The women crouched together, but Biame flashed a fire stick whence came the sound, and as the light flashed on the place he saw no one, but stranger than all, he saw 2 dayals moving along, and yet could not see no one moving them. And as the dayals moved swiftly away, louder and louder rose the sound of until the air seemed full of invisible spirits. Then Biame knew that indeed the Wanda were about, and he too clutched his fire stick and went back into his camp. In the morning it was seen that not only were the dayals gone, but the camp of the demur was empty, and they too had gone. When no one would lend the demur dayals, they had said, Then we can grind no doonbur unless the Wanda bring us stones. And scarcely were the words said before they saw a dayal moving towards them. At first they thought it was their own skill, which enabled them only to express a wish to have it realized, but as dayal after dayal glided into their camp, and passing through there, moved on, and as they moved was the sound of to be heard everywhere, they knew it was the Wanderer at work, and it was borne in upon them that where the dayal went they must go, or they would anger the spirits who had brought them through their camp. They gathered up their belongings and followed in the track of the dayals, which had cut a pathway from Gugurawan to Girraween, down which in high floods is now a watercourse. From Girraween on the dayals went to Durangaburra, and after them the Damur. Durangaburra is between Brewarrina and Widamurti, and there the dayals piled themselves up into a mountain, and there for the future had the blacks to go when they wanted good dayals. And the demur were changed into pigeons, with a cry like the spirits of Another strange thing happened at this big bora. A tribe called Ubon were camped at some distance from the other tribes, When any stranger went to their camp, it was noticed that the chief of the Uboon would come out and flash a light on him which killed him instantly, and no one knew what this light was that carried death in its gleam. At last Wan the Crow said, "I will take my biggest burrin and go and see what this means. You others do not follow me too closely, for though I have planned how to save myself from the deadly gleam, I might not be able to save you." Wan walked into the camp of the Ubon, and as their chief turned to flash the light on him, he put up his burrin and completely shaded himself from it, and called aloud in a deep voice, "Wah, wah, wah, wah," which so startled Ubon that he dropped his light and said, "What is the matter? You startled me. I did not know who you were and might have hurt you, though I had no wish to, for the Wan are my friends." "I cannot stop now," said the Wan. "I must go back to my camp. I have forgotten something I wanted to show you. I'll be back soon." And so saying, swiftly ran Wan back to where he had left his boondi. Then back he came almost before Ubon realized that he had gone. Back he came and stealing up behind Ubon, dealt him a blow with his boondi that avenged amply the victims of the deadly light, by stretching the chief of the Ubon a corpse on the ground at his feet. Then crying triumphantly, "Wah, wah, wah," back to his camp went Wan and told what he had done. This night, when the Bora corroboree began, all the women relations of the boys to be made young men corroboreed all night. Towards the end of the night all the young women were ordered into bough humpies, which had been previously made all around the edge of the embankment surrounding the ring. The old women stayed on. The men who were to have charge of the boys to be made young men were told now to be ready to seize hold each of his special charge, to carry him off down the beaten track to the scrub. When every man had, at a signal, taken his charge on his shoulder, they all started dancing round the ring. Then the old women were told to come and say goodbye to the boys, after which they were ordered to join the young women in the humpies. About 5 men watched them into the humpies, then pulled the boughs down on top of them that they might see nothing further. When the women were safely imprisoned beneath the boughs, the men carrying the boys swiftly disappeared down the track into the scrub. When they were out of sight, the 5 blackfellows came and pulled the boughs away and released the women, who went now to their camps. But however curious these women were as to what rites attended the boys' initiation into manhood, they knew no question would elicit any information. In some months' time they might see their boys return, minus perhaps a front tooth, and with some extra scarifications on their bodies. But beyond that, and a knowledge of the fact that they had not been allowed to look on the face of a woman since their disappearance into the scrub, they were never enlightened. The next day the tribes made ready to travel to the place of the Little Bora, which would be held in about 4 days' time, at about 10 or 12 miles distance from the scene of the Big Bora. At the place of the Little Bora a ring of grass is made instead of one of earth. The tribes all travel together there, camp, and have a corroboree. The young women are sent to bed early, and the old women stay until the time when the boys bade farewell to them at the Big Bora, at which hour the boys are brought into the Little Bora and allowed to say a last goodbye to the old women. Then they are taken away by the men who have charge of them together. They stay together for a short time, then probably separate, each man with his one boy going in a different direction. The man keeps strict charge of the boy for at least 6 months, during which time he may not even look at his own mother. At the end of about 6 months he may come back to his tribe, but the effect of his isolation is that he is too wild and frightened to speak even to his mother, from whom he runs away if she approaches him, until by degrees the strangeness wears off. But at this Bora of Biome the tribes were not destined to meet the boys at the Little Bora. Just as they were gathering up their goods for a start, into the camp staggered Milindilunaba, the widow, crying, "You all left me, widow that I was, with my large family of children, to travel alone. How could the little feet of my children keep up to you? Can my back bear more than one goulet? Have I more than 2 arms and 1 back? Then how could I come swiftly with so many children? Yet none of you stayed to help me. And as you went from each water-hole you drank all the water. When tired and thirsty I reached a water-hole, and my children cried for a drink. What did I find to give them? Mud, only mud. Then thirsty and worn, my children crying, and their mother helpless to comfort them, on we came to the next hole. What did we see, as we strained our eyes to find water? Mud, only mud. As we reached hole after hole and found only mud, one by one my children lay down and died. Died for want of a drink? which Milindoolinaba, their mother, could not give them. As she spoke, swiftly went a woman to her with a wherry of water. Too late, she said. Why should a mother live when her children are dead? And she lay back with a groan. But as she felt the water cool her parched lips and soften her swollen tongue, she made a final effort, rose to her feet, and waving her hands round the camps of the tribes, cried aloud, "You were in such haste to get here. You shall stay here. Googlegaya, Googlegaya! Turn into trees, turn into trees!" Then back she fell dead. And as she fell, the tribes that were standing round the edge of the ring, preparatory to gathering their goods and going, and that her hand pointed to as it waved around, turned into trees. There they now stand. The tribes in the background were changed each according to the name they were known by, into that bird or beast of the same name. The barking Marti into dogs, the Biamul into black swans, the Wans into crows, and so on. And there at the place of the big Bora you can see the trees standing tall and gaunt, sad looking in their sombre hues, waving with a sad wailing their branches towards the lake which covers now the place where the Bora was held. And it bears the name of Gugurawan, the place of trees, and round the edge of it is still to be seen the remains of the Bora ring of earth. And it is known as a great place of meeting for the birds that bear the names of the tribes of old. The Biamul sail proudly about, the pelicans, their water rivals in point of size and beauty, the ducks, and many others too numerous to mention. The uboon, or blue-tongued lizards, glide in and out through the grass. Now and then is heard the of the demur, and occasionally a cry from the bird Milindoolinaba, Googlegaya, Googlegaya, and in answer comes the wailing of the gloomy-looking balar trees, and a rustling stir through the bibble branches, until at last every tree gives forth its voice and makes sad the margin of the lake with echoes of the past. But the men and boys who were at the place of the little Bora escaped the metamorphosis. They waited long for the arrival of the tribes who never came. At last Biami said, "Surely mighty enemies have slain our friends, and no one escapes to tell us of their fate. Even now these enemies may be upon our track. Let us go into a far country." And swiftly they went to Noondoo, hurrying along with them a dog of Biami's, which would fain have lain by the roadside rather than have travelled so swiftly. But Biami would not leave her and hurried her on. When they reached the springs of Noondoo, the dog sneaked away into a thick scrub, and there were born her litter of pups. But such pups as surely man never looked at before, the bodies of dogs, the heads of pigs, and the fierceness and strength of devils. And gone is the life of a man who meets in a scrub of Noondoo an Earmunin, for surely will it slay him. Not even did Biami ever dare to go near the breed of his old dog, and Biami the mighty Wareenan lives forever. But no man must look upon his face, lest surely will he die. So alone in a thick scrub, on one of the Noondoo ridges, lives this old man Biami, the mightiest of the Wareenan. End of chapter 26.
Chapter 27 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Evan Barnes. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 27. Bunny Jarl the Flies and Warranuna the Bees. The Bunny Jarl and Warranuna were relations, and lived in one camp. The Warranuna were very hard-working, always trying to gather food in a time of plenty, to lay in a store for a time of famine. The Bunny Jarl used to give no heed to the future, but used to waste their time playing round any rubbish, and never thinking even of laying up any provisions. One day the Warranuna said, "Come out with us and gather honey from flowers. Soon will the winter winds blow the flowers away, and there will be no more honey to gather." "No," said the Bunny Jarl, "we have something to look to here." And off they went, turning over some rubbish and wasting their time, knowing whatever the Warranuna brought, they would share with them. The Warranuna went alone and left the bunny jarl to their rubbish. The Warranuna gathered the flowers and stored the honey, and never more went back to live with the bunny jarls, for they were tired of doing all the work. As time went on, the Warranuna were changed into little wild bees, and the lazy bunny jarls were changed into flies. End of chapter 27.
Chapter 28 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 28. Djamboya the Soldier Bird. Djamboya was an old man, and getting past hunting much for himself, and he found it hard to keep his 2 wives and his 2 daughters supplied with food. He camped with his family away from the other tribes, but he used to join the men of the Malyan tribe when they were going out hunting, and so get a more certain supply of food than if he had gone by himself. One day when the Malyan went out, he was too late to accompany them. He hid in the scrub and waited for their return, at some little distance from their camp. When they were coming back, he heard them singing the song of Setting Emu, a song which whoever finds the first emu's nest of the season always sings before getting back to the camp. Djamboya jumped up as he heard the song, and started towards the camp of the Malyan singing the same song, as if he too had found a nest. On they all went towards the camp, singing joyously, Nerdu nerbu, me dream dreamba, gambe buan yanade biwa, gabondidi, nia nangulbaja, which song roughly translated means, I saw it first amongst the young trees, the white mark on its forehead, the white mark that before I had only seen as the emus moved together in the daytime. Never did I see one camp before, only moving, moving always. Now that we have found the nest, we must look out the ants do not get to the eggs. If they crawl over them, the eggs are spoilt. As the last echo of the song died away, those in the camp took up the refrain and sang it back to the hunters to let them know that they understood that they had found the first emu's nest of the season. When the hunters reached the camp, up came Djamboya too. The Malyans turned to him and said, Did you find an emu's nest too? Yes, said Djamboya, I did. I think you must have found the same, though after me, as I saw not your tracks. But I am older and stiff in my limbs, so came back not so quickly. Tell me, where is your nest? In the clump of the Goolabahs, on the edge of the plain, said the unsuspecting Malyan. Ah, thought so, that is mine. But what matter, we can share, there will be plenty for all. We must get the net and go and camp near the nest tonight, and tomorrow trap the emu. The Malyan got their emu trapping net, one made of thin rope about as thick as a thin clothesline, about 5 feet high, and between 200 and 300 yards long, and off they set, accompanied by Djamboya, to camp near where the emu was setting. When they had chosen a place to camp, they had their supper and a little corroboree, illustrative of slaying emu, etc. The next morning at daylight they erected their net into a sort of triangular-shaped yard, one side open. Blackfellows were stationed at each end of the net, and at stated distances along it. The net was upheld by upright poles. When the net was fixed, some of the blacks made a wide circle round the emu's nest, leaving open the sides towards the net. They closed in gradually until they frightened the emu off the nest. The emu, seeing blackfellows on every side but one, ran in that direction. The blacks followed closely, and the bird was soon yarded. Madly the frightened bird rushed against the net. Up ran a blackfellow, seized the bird and wrung its neck. Then some of them went back to the nest to get the eggs, which they baked in the ashes of their fire and ate. They made a hole to cook the emu in. They plucked the emu. When they had plenty of coals, they put a thick layer at the bottom of the hole, some twigs of leaves on top of the coals, some feathers on the top of them. Then they laid the emu in. More feathers on the top of it, leaves again on top of them, and over them a thick layer of coals, and lastly they covered all with earth. It would be several hours in cooking, so Djamboya said, I will stay and cook the emu. You young fellows take the murruns, emu spears, and try and get some more emu. The Mulyan thought there was a sense in this proposal, so they took a couple of long spears with a jagged nick at one end to hold the emu when they speared it. They stuck a few emu feathers on the end of each spear and went off. They soon saw a flock of emu coming past where they were waiting to water. Two of the party, armed with the manoon, climbed a tree, broke some boughs, and put these thickly beneath them, so as to screen them from the emu. Then, as the emu came near to the men, they dangled down their spears, letting the emu feathers on the ends wave to and fro. The emu, seeing the feathers, were curious as to how they got there, came over, craning their necks and sniffing right underneath the spears. The blackfellows tightly grasped the manoons and drove them with force into the two emu they had picked. One emu dropped dead at once, the other ran with a spear in it for a short distance, but the blackfellow was quickly after it and soon caught and killed it outright. Then, carrying the dead birds, back they went to where Djamboya was cooking the other emu. They cooked the two they had brought, and then all started for the camp in great spirits at their successful chase. They began throwing their marulas as they went along, and playing with the bubbarahs, or returning boomerangs. Old Djamboya said, "Here, give me the emus to carry, and then you will be free to have a really good game with your marulas and bubbarahs, and see who is the best man." They gave him the emus, and on they went, some throwing marulas and some showing their skill with the bubbarahs. Presently Djamboya sat down. They thought he was just resting for a few minutes, so ran on laughing and playing, each good throw eliciting another effort, for none liked owning themselves beaten while they had a marula left. As they got further away, they noticed Djamboya was still sitting down, so they called out to him to know what was the matter. "All right," he said, "only having a rest. Shall come on in a minute." So on they went. When they were quite out of sight, Djamboya jumped up quickly, took up the emus, and made for an opening in the ground at a little distance. This opening was the underground home of the Murgamagui spider. The opening was a neat covering, like a sort of trapdoor. Down through this he went, taking the emus with him, knowing there was another exit at some distance, out of which he could come up quite near his home, for it was the way he often took after hunting. The Mulyans went home and waited, but no sign of Djamboya. Then back on their tracks they went, and called aloud, but got no answer, and saw no sign. At last Malyanga, the chief of the Mulyans, said he would find him. Arming himself with his boondies and spears, he went back to where he had last seen Djamboya sitting. He saw where his tracks turned off and where they disappeared, but could not account for their disappearance, as he did not notice the neat little trapdoor of the Murgamagui. But he hunted round, determined to scour the bush until he found them. At last he saw a camp. He went up to it and saw only two little girls playing about, whom he knew were the daughters of Djamboya. "Where is your father?" he asked them. "Out hunting," they said. "Which way does he come home?" "Our father comes home out of this," and they showed him the spider's trapdoor. "Where are your mothers?" "Our mothers are out getting honey and yams," and off ran the little girls to a leaning tree on which they played, running up its bent trunk. Mulyangar went and stood where the trunk was highest from the ground and said, "Now, little girls, run up here and jump, and I will catch you. Jump one at a time." Off jumped one of the girls towards his outstretched arms, which as she came toward him he dropped, and stepping aside let her come with her full force to the ground, where she lay dead. Then he called to the horror-stricken child on the tree, "Come, jump! Your sister came too quickly. Wait till I call, then jump." "No, I'm afraid." "Come on, I'll be ready this time. Now come." "I'm afraid." "Come on, I am strong." And he smiled quite kindly up at the child, who hesitated no longer, jumped towards his arms, only to meet her sister's fate. "Now," said Malyanga, "here come the two wives. I must silence them, or when they see their children, their cries will warn their husband if he is within earshot." So he sneaked behind a tree, and as the two wives passed, he struck them dead with his spears. Then he went to the trapdoor that the children had shown him, and sat down to wait for the coming of Djamboya. He had not long to wait. The trapdoor was pushed up, and out came a cooked emu, which he caught hold of and laid on one side. Djamboya thought it was the girls taking it, as they had often watched for his coming and done before, so he pushed up another, which Mulyangar took, then a third, and lastly came up himself, to find Mulyangar confronting him, spear and boondi in hand. He started back, but the trapdoor was shut behind him, and Mullingar barred his escape in front. "Ah," said Mullingar, "you stole our food, and now you shall die. I've killed your children." Dejemboya looked wildly around, and seeing the dead bodies of his girls beneath a leaning tree, he groaned aloud. "And," went on Mullingar, "I've killed your wives." Dejemboya raised his head and looked again wildly round, and there on their homeward path he saw his dead wives. Then he called aloud, "Here, Mullingar, are your emus. Take them and spare me. I shall steal no more, for I myself want little, but my children and my wives hungered. But I stole for them. Spare me, I pray you. I am old. I shall not live long. Spare me." "Not so," said Mullingar. "No man lives to steal twice from Mulyan." And so saying, he speared Dejemboya where he stood. Then he lifted up the emus, and carrying them with him, went swiftly back to his camp. And merry was the supper that night when the Mulyans ate the emus, and Mullingar told the story of his search and slaughter, and proud were the Mulyans of the prowess and cunning of their chief. End of chapter 28.
Chapter 29 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 29. Mayra, the wind that blows the winter away. At the beginning of winter, the iguanas hide themselves in their homes in the sand. The black eaglehawks go into their nests. The garbalee or shinglebacks hide themselves in little logs, just big enough to hold them. The iguanas dig a long way into the sand and cover up the passage behind them as they go along. They all stay in their winter homes until Mayra blows the winter away. Mayra first blows up a thunderstorm. When the iguanas hear the thunder, they know the spring is not far off, so they begin making a passage to go out again. But they do not leave their winter home until the curryquinquin or butcherbirds sing all day almost without ceasing, "Gaw, gaw, gaw, gaw." Then they know that Mayra has really blown the winter away, for the birds are beginning to pair and build their nests. So they open their eyes and come out on the green earth again. And when the blackfellows hear the curryquinquins singing, "Gaw, gaw," they know that they can go out and find iguanas again, and find them fatter than when they went away with the coming of winter. Then, too, will they find piccaninnies hurrying along to get away from their young ones, which they have buried in the sand and left to shift for themselves, for no longer can they carry them, as the spines of the young ones begin to prick them in their pouch. So they leave them and hurry away, that they may not hear their cry. They know they shall meet them again later on, when they are grown big. Then as Mayra softly blows, the flowers one by one open, and the bees come out again to gather honey. Every bird wears his gayest plumage and sings his sweetest song to attract a mate, and in pairs they go to build their nests, and still Mayra softly blows until the land is one of plenty. Then the sun chases her back whence she came, and the flowers droop and the birds sing only in the early morning, for rules in the land until the storms are over and have cooled him, and winter takes his place to be blown away again by Mayra, the loved of all, and the bringer of plenty. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 30. Wyambi the Turtle. Oola the Lizard was out getting yams on a mirror flat. She had 3 of her children with her. Suddenly she thought she heard someone moving behind the big mirror bushes. She listened. All of a sudden out jumped Wyamba from behind a bush and seized Oola, telling her not to make a noise and he would not hurt her, but that he meant to take her off to his camp to be his wife. He would take her 3 children too and look after them. Resistance was useless, for Ulu had only her yamstick, while Wyamba had his spears and boondies. Wyamba took the woman and her children to his camp. His tribe, when they saw him bringing home a woman of the Ulu tribe, asked him if her tribe had given her to him. He said, "No, I have stolen her." "Well," they said, "her tribe will soon be after her. You must protect yourself. We shall not fight for you. You had no right to steal her without telling us. We had a young woman of our own tribe for you, yet you go and steal an Ulu and bring her back to the camp of the Waamba. On your own head be the consequences." In a short time the Ulus were seen coming across the plain which faced the camp of the Waamba, and they came not in friendship or to parley, for no women were with them, and they carried no boughs of peace in their bands, but were painted as for war, and were armed with fighting weapons. When the Waamba saw the approach of the Ula, the chief said, "Now, Waamba, you had better go out onto the plain and do your own fighting. We shall not help you." Waamba chose the 2 biggest bowroons that he had. One he slung on him, covering the front of his body, and one the back. Then, seizing his weapons, he strode out to meet his enemies. When he was well out onto the plain, though still some distance from the Ulu, he called out, "Come on!" The answer was a shower of spears and boomerangs. As they came whizzing through the air, Waamba drew his arms inside the bowroons, and ducked his head down between them, so escaped. As the weapons fell harmless to the ground, glancing off his bowroon, out again he stretched his arms, and held up again his head, shouting, "Come on, try again, I'm ready." The answer was another shower of weapons, which he met in the same way. At last the Ulus closed in round him, forcing him to retreat towards the creek. Shower after shower of weapons they slung at him, and were getting at such close quarters that his only chance was to dive into the creek. He turned towards the creek, tore the front bowroon off him, flung down his weapons and plunged in. The Ulu waited, spears poised in hand, ready to aim directly his head appeared above water, but they waited in vain. Wyamba, the blackfellow, they never saw again, but in the waterhole wherein he had dived, they saw a strange creature, which bore on its back a fixed structure like a bowron, and which, when they went to try and catch it, drew its head and limbs, so they said, "It is a Waamba," and that was the beginning of Waamba, or turtle in the creeks. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh PARKER. Chapter 31. Wirranun the Rainmaker. The country was stricken with a drought. The rivers were all dry except the deepest holes in them. The grass was dead, and even the trees were dying. The bark dardoo of the blacks were all fallen to the ground and lay there rotting. So long was it since they had been used, for only in wet weather did the blacks use the bark dardoo, At other times they used only wat de rail, or bow shades. The young men of the Noongahburrah murmured among themselves, at first secretly, at last openly, saying, "Did not our fathers always say that the Wirranun could make, as we wanted it, the rain to fall? Yet look at our country, the grass blown away, no Doonbur seed to grind. The kangaroo are dying, and the emu, the duck, and the swan have flown to far countries. We shall have no food soon, then shall we die, and the Noongahburrah be no more seen on the Narran. Then why, if he is able, does not Wirranun innate rain?" Soon these murmurs reached the ears of the old Wirranun. He said nothing, but the young fellows noticed that for 2 or 3 days in succession he went to the waterhole in the creek and placed in it a wilgoo, a long stick, ornamented at the top with white cockatoo feathers, and beside the stick he placed 2 big gabbarah, that is, 2 big clear pebbles which at other times he always secreted about him, in the folds of his waywah, or in the band or net on his head. Especially was he careful to hide these stones from the women. At the end of the 3rd day Wirranun said to the young men, "Go you, take your kumboos and cut bark sufficient to make dardoo for all the tribe." The young men did as they were bade. When they had the bark cut and brought in, Wirranun said, "Go you now and raise with ant bed a high place, and put thereon logs and wood for a fire. Build the ant bed about a foot from the ground. Then put you a floor of ant bed a foot high wherever you are going to build a dardoo." And they did what he told them. When the dardoo was finished, having high floors of ant bed and watertight roofs of bark, Wirranun commanded the whole camp to come with him to the waterhole. Men, women, and children, all were to come. They all followed him down to the creek, to the waterhole where he had placed the wilgoo and gabbarah. Wirranun jumped into the water and bade the tribe follow him, which they did. There in the water they all splashed and played about. After a little time Wirranun went up first behind one blackfellow and then behind another, until at length he had been round them all, and taken from the back of each one's head lumps of charcoal. When he went up to each he appeared to suck the back or top of their heads, and to draw out lumps of charcoal, which, as he sucked them out, he spat into the water. When he had gone the round of all, he went out of the water, but just as he got out a young man caught him up in his arms and threw him back into the water. This happened several times, until Wirranun was shivering. That was the signal for all to leave the creek. Wirranun sent all the young people into a big bough shed, and bade them all to go to sleep. He and 2 old men and 2 old women stayed outside. They loaded themselves with all their belongings piled up on their backs, dale stones and all, as if ready for a flitting. These old people walked impatiently around the bough shed as if waiting a signal to start somewhere. Soon a big black cloud appeared on the horizon, first a single cloud, which, however, was soon followed by others rising all around. They rose quickly until they all met just overhead, forming a big black mass of clouds. As soon as this big, heavy, rain-laden looking cloud was stationary overhead, the old people went into the bough shed and bade the young people wake up and come out and look at the sky. When they were all roused, Wirranun told them to lose no time, but to gather together all their possessions and hasten to gain the shelter of the bark dardoo. Scarcely were they all in the dardoos and their spears well hidden, when there sounded a terrific clap of thunder, which was quickly followed by a regular cannonade, lightning flashes shooting across the sky, followed by instantaneous claps of deafening thunder, a sudden flash of lightning which lit a pathway from heaven to earth, was followed by such a terrific clash that the blacks thought their very camps were struck. But it was a tree a little distance off. The blacks huddled together in their dardoos, frightened to move, the children crying with fear, and the dogs crouching towards their owners. "We shall be killed!" shrieked the women. The men said nothing but looked as frightened. Only Wirranun was fearless. "I will go out," he said, "and stop the storm from hurting us. The lightning shall come no nearer." So out in front of the dardoos strode Wirranun, and naked he stood there facing the storm, singing aloud, as the thunder roared and the lightning flashed, the chant which was to keep it away from the camp. "Gurry Murray, Murray, Durra Murray, Murray, Murray," etc. Soon came a lull in the cannonade. A slight breeze stirred the trees for a few moments, then an oppressive silence, and then the rain in the real earnest began, and settled down to a steady downpour which lasted for some days. When the old people had been patrolling the bowshed as the clouds rose overhead, Wirranun had gone to the waterhole and taken out the wilgoo and the stones, for he saw by the cloud that their work was done. When the rain was over and the country all green again, the blacks had a great corroboree and sang of the skill of Wirranun, Rainmaker to the Noongahburrah. Wirranun sat calm and heedless of their praise, as he had been of their murmurs, but he determined to show them that his powers were great. So he summoned the Rainmaker of a neighbouring tribe, and after some consultation with him, he ordered the tribes to go to the Noongahburrahs, which was then a dry plain, with the solemn, gaunt trees all around it, which had once been black fellows. When they were all camped round the edges of this plain, Wirranun and his fellow Rainmaker made a great rain to fall just over the plain and fill it with water. When the plain was changed into a lake, Wirranun said to the young men of his tribe, "Now take your nets and fish." "What good?" said they. "The lake is filled from the rain, not the flood waters of rivers, filled but yesterday. How then shall there be fish?" "Go," said Wirranun, "go as I bid you, fish. If your nets catch nothing, then shall Wirranun speak no more to the men of his tribe. He will seek only honey and yams with the women." More to please the man who had changed their country from a desert to a hunter's paradise, they did as he bade them, took their nets and went into the lake. And the first time they drew their nets, they were heavy with goodoo, murray, tucky, and bunmilla, and so many did they catch that all the tribes and their dogs had plenty. Then the elders of the camp said now that there was plenty everywhere, they would have a burra, that the boys should be made young men. On one of the ridges away from the camp, that the women should not know, would they prepare a ground. And so was the big burra of the Noongahburrahs held, the burra which was famous as following on the triumph of Wirranun the Rainmaker. End of Chapter 31. End of Australian Legendary Tales Folklore by Mrs. K. Langloh Parker.